across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Well, a very good afternoon. This is Talk Drive. I'm Peter Cardwell. President Trump has threatened to sue the BBC for $1 billion because of the major mistake they made in a Panorama documentary. It's just one of many mistakes they've made. I was on BBC News last night. They invited me on, and we'll be playing a little bit of that in just a second to see what my criticisms of them are. You can probably guess what they are. Lack of impartiality, a major bias on the Middle East, and problems with trans stories too, to say nothing of the cut and shot, the bad editing, the inappropriate, completely wrong, scandalous editing of President Trump to change the meaning of what he did. Then they doubled down, they decided to suppress this report, and then of course it came out and they've had to react to it. The CEO of News, Deborah Turness, she's been saying there's no cultural bias. I think she's wrong. And the Director General, Tim Davie, have resigned. We'll be discussing that right throughout the programme today. We'll also be talking about the one-in, one-out fiasco, because a second person deported on one-in, one-out is back from France, has made a second journey across the Channel and is back in the UK, only to be deported again, authorities say. What do you think of that? 0344 499 1000. We'll be talking as well about all sorts of issues. We'll look at the sport, we'll look at Jewish staff accusing the BBC of ignoring their calls in an anti-Semitism probe as well. We'll look at the Danish immigration system and whether that could provide some answers here in the UK. We'll also be talking about Rachel Reeves, because she has said a difficult budget ahead as she refuses to rule out tax rises. She's basically said tax rises are coming for you and for me on the 26th of November, the 26th of this month, in just over 2 weeks' time, Wednesday, 2 weeks. Lots to discuss today, a big meaty show, lots to discuss. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can text me at 72222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV. Follow me at Peter Cardwell. Send me a voice note, less than a minute, please. Tech Up Davis here, he's going to listen to them. We're going to play out as many of them as we can. You can send me that on the main number, as you can send me WhatsApp text messages. You can also give me a ring on the main number, which is of course 0344 499 1000. So much to discuss between now and 7 o'clock. I'm here on Drive all week. Let's get started with Monday's Talk Drive. Well, the outgoing CEO of BBC News, Deborah Turness, arrived for work this morning despite having resigned, and said, was asked whether the broadcaster is biased. This is what she said.
I would like to say it has been the privilege of my career to serve as the CEO of BBC News and to work with our brilliant team of journalists. I stepped down over the weekend because the buck stops with me. But I'd like to make one thing very clear. BBC News is not institutionally biased. That's why it's the world's most trusted news provider. Of course our journalists aren't corrupt. Our journalists are hard-working people who strive for impartiality, and I will stand by their journalism.
Is there institutional bias at the BBC?
There is no institutional bias. Mistakes are made, but there's no institutional bias.
But why weren't the mistakes dealt with on Trump, on anti-Semitism, on women's rights?
I'm sure that story will emerge.
A little bit of the old Mandy Rice-Davis aspect of this. She would say that, wouldn't she? Earlier today, Nigel Farage spoke to Talk about the BBC. This is what he said to Jeremy.
I'm going to defund the BBC from its current model, be in no doubt about that. The BBC, under our plans, would be slimmed down to something very relatively small, but most of it would move to a subscription model to compete in the open market. You know, do I want it to have a basic role for news and current affairs? Yes, but it's going to have to be very, very different to the way it is now.
That was Nigel Farage speaking to Jeremy a little bit earlier on. Well, last night I got the phone call to come on BBC News, the news channel myself. I've been on there a few times. I used to work for the BBC, worked there for about 3 years cumulatively. This is what I told the BBC News channel last night. There's a cultural problem, unlike what Deborah Turness said. Deborah Turness and Tim Davie, two incredibly important people until today in the BBC, but the problem is the culture of the BBC. And I must say that I worked for BBC News, I worked for Newsnight, I worked for Question Time, I've worked in BBC Northern Ireland for the cumulative total of about 3 years. I have many friends and colleagues, many who did an incredibly good job, and I'm sure there are still very many people, I know there are many people at the BBC who do great work and take impartiality very, very seriously. The problem is that we pay the licence fee for the BBC to be impartial. It hasn't been impartial recently on a number of issues, and it wasn't Deborah Turness or Tim Davie who doctored the clip of Donald Trump so that it didn't tell the truth. It wasn't Deborah Turness or Tim Davie who had put the trans guidance out, for example, or sanctioned Martine Croxall. It wasn't Tim Davie or Deborah Turness who decided that certain things should go on the BBC Verify website that were then taken down for being wrong. There are major, major problems here. I wouldn't have dreamt of doing an edit like they did on Donald Trump, for example. That wouldn't have entered my head when I was a BBC employee. It wouldn't enter my head now as a journalist still. And I think that clearly there are many problems right throughout this. Also with the Gaza documentary, why has the executive producer of that not been held to account? Why have people not been forced to resign or sacked as a result of that? There's much more to this. Yes, well done for Deborah Turness for falling on her sword. She should have done that a long time ago, as should Tim Davie. But there are many other people that need to be held to account for this. And if things don't change properly, if the culture doesn't change, and if the BBC doesn't get back to those Reithian values of doing the right thing, of acting impartially for the licence fee we pay them, well then its future as an organisation, particularly as a news organisation, is in doubt when we see the last 3 Directors General having to resign because of serious editorial feelings. That was me speaking to the BBC last night on the BBC News channel about the BBC. Well, Akhil Ahmed is the former head of religion and ethics at the BBC, and Adrian Mills is a former BBC presenter. Akhil, great to have you on the programme again. Now we have the Director General and the Chief Executive of BBC News who have resigned. I think, and I wonder what you think, I mean, Jonathan Munro, who's a very senior BBC editor, he wrote the sex and gender guidance that has been criticised in this. Richard Burgess oversaw identity and LGBT coverage, and Stuart Miller has been in charge of digital during a period of major, major issues. Surely there should be more people who resign as a result of this.
Well, I think we've got to be clear about the resignations that we've seen so far, Peter, and that is basically, Tim Davie says he's stepping down because it's been a difficult job, and the last year or so has taken its toll on him. And I think Deborah, as you said, she has fallen on her sword for the things that she's in charge of, that she takes responsibility. I think that all the things that were in that particular memo have to be investigated, and they will be, and until they're investigated, I don't think it's right for me or anybody really to start calling for people to be sacked without knowing the full details of that investigation. But I agree with you. I think I said this some of the times we've talked before, which is if when you make mistakes, and this was a mistake, I've been clear about that from day one. This was a mistake, the edit. You have to learn from that mistake. Now, the question mark here is that this was a program made by an independent production company, and I think there's been a breakdown somewhere in the chain of command, as it were.
And we've seen that on a number of occasions with the Gaza documentary, and clearly the right people.
Also made by an independent production company.
Well, exactly, and what's the point of all those highly paid executive producers if they don't know what's happened in the programme making, and if they're not taking responsibility for it? Adrian,
because you have to ask those questions. Are people asking the right questions anymore?
You're absolutely right.
I'm not there to know the answer, but the fact of the matter is, it's interesting that it seems to be happening on a regular occurrence when people maybe not asking the right question. That simple question we always used to ask when you first walk into the edit suite: is there something you want to tell me?
Yes.
Is there something that I need to know?
What do you think, I'll come to Adrian Mills in a second, but what do you think about the wisdom or otherwise of the John Simpsons, the Nick Robinsons and the James Landales of this world? James Landale said when the guff it comes and goes, when the guff is over, he put in a tweet. Nick Robinson says there is an attack, a politically motivated attack on the BBC. I mean, two things can be true at the same time, of course, but you realise how this comes across. They perhaps don't realise how this comes across, in that it looks as if criticism, legitimate criticism, I would argue, of the BBC is actually putting up the hackles and being very much making them into a defensive position where they're lashing out. And I just see, John Simpson complaining about criticism of the Israel coverage, for example. Well, I mean, he's entitled to do that, but is today the day to do that? Surely they should just take this on the chin and get on with it, Akhil.
No, I can't really argue any of that. You're right. Two things can be right. And I think two things are right here. I think there is in some quarters a political attack, but ultimately, that's the thing that we need to look at now. A mistake has been made and you have to hold your hand up, just as Deborah did, and you hold your hand up. Now, the fact of the matter is, you're right. It's not necessarily the time to kind of like try and go out there on the front foot of this. You've got to take, when you've made a mistake, and it's a big one, you basically have to kind of regroup and figure out how you're going to go forward. You learn the lessons from it. You look at what's around you. The bigger picture is the license fee renewal.
Yeah.
The bigger picture is winning back the trust of the DCMS, of all sorts of different people.
Of our viewers and listeners as well, Akhil. Let me come back to you in a second. Adrian Mills is with us too, former BBC presenter. Adrian, once you lose trust, it's very, very difficult to get it back, isn't it? And Akhil rightly says that Deborah Turness has fallen on her sword and has taken responsibility for this, but I think there are other people who need to take responsibility too. I also think that it's very, very difficult to say to people, we've changed, when just two people have changed in their positions. Yeah. What do you think, Adrian?
I think when trust and credibility goes out the window, you've got to fight damned hard to bring it back. What I don't understand, and I've worked, as you have, for the BBC and for independent production companies who made programmes for the BBC, were there were so many checks. The editor, the producer, the deputy producer, then somebody from the BBC would come over and view the finished product. And I find it extraordinary, as you mentioned so articulately when you were talking on the TV the other night, that actually it's incredible that a journalist can take somebody's speech, hack it to pieces, and bear in mind, in that programme, there's some very ominous underlying music as well, which is used to great sort of fear effect, and that they will not be accountable. I would suspect that they won't be getting any more commissions from the BBC, and it is honourable that people have fallen on their swords. But
the interesting thing I find, Adrian, as well, is when I was a BBC producer, it wouldn't have occurred to me. It just wouldn't have entered my head to do an edit like that, because it's unfair and it's wrong. We don't do them here at Talk. Other broadcasters don't do them because it's a clear breach of journalistic ethics. Yeah. But then the problem is that once that was identified, brought to the board through this ethics report, through this dossier, which is now...
In May, I believe.
Yeah, entirely in the public domain. For months it was suppressed. I mean, Akhil correctly says that Deborah Turness and Tim Davie have resigned as a result of it, but they've resigned essentially, I'm not taking issue with what Akhil has said, but they've resigned essentially because they've been found out.
Yes. I wouldn't be surprised if perhaps there's been a little bit of government pressure put on them as well. There's been all sorts of headlines over these last few days. But this is, when Akhil mentioned that, you learn and you move forward. Well, the problem is, I think, is that people are looking going, the BBC aren't learning anything. Because
that's a very fair point. Let me take that with Akhil, actually, because, Akhil, we've had, I actually don't disagree with a single thing you've said today, which is rare, but we're in a situation where the last 3 Directors General have resigned because of editorial failings and BBC News editorial failings. Why do you think that is, Akhil? Obviously there are individual circumstances in all those cases, but to say this isn't a culture is quite serious for Deborah Turness, and I fundamentally disagree with her on that point.
Yeah, we can have another little conversation about the culture, but I think in terms of this mistake, this was a clear mistake. I mean, a very simple flash between the 2 edits would have been enough. I don't really understand what they were trying to get at. This is a speech which has been seen a lot by a lot of people for the last year or so. So I'm actually quite surprised by what the mistake that they made. Now, in terms of when mistakes were made in the past, and I think Queengate was the one where a lot of changes came in, where we had all this work around what we call viewer trust. I was at Channel 4 at the time, so across BBC, Channel 4, ITV, everybody, we kind of raised our game a little bit because we understood that there were issues around the trust that viewers had in our output. And I think sometimes you need to keep on, it sounds like a stupid thing to say, but you do need to keep on reminding people. And I think what we need to see now is one of those things that we kind of laugh at, we laugh at the middle management, etc. But you know what? Maybe there isn't enough quality middle management or management anymore, because I'm like, as Adrian said, and as you have said it yourself, I don't understand how this got through the system. I really don't. I can understand a conversation where they may think that they've debated this, but it's quite basic and simple. The President of the United States, you don't do an edit on a...
But it's not just that as well, Akhil.
But you learn your lesson, though, don't you? We learned our lesson in the past. I think people have just forgotten. Actually, I think there's just not enough rigour, as there's too much around you, and there's not enough rigour and basic, simple principles.
But you talk about rigour. I agree with what you're saying, Akhil, but surely it's a management failure as well. You may well point to the fact that Deborah Turness and Tim Davie have gone, and that's fine. You know, good for them for falling on their sword. Should have happened a long time ago. But the reason they're resigning is because of the public controversy. If they'd simply taken that report and said what Samir Shah has said in a letter today, the chairman of the BBC, Samir Shah, has said in a letter today that every single one of those allegations will be investigated. If they'd simply said that in May, even behind the scenes, this probably wouldn't have made it into the public domain. Changes would have been made.
I agree with you. I'm quite surprised. Well, I know Samir, and I know that I know how busy they have been. Right, that's not an excuse. I think that as busy as you are, if you feel there's an issue about the President of the United States and that actually an edit has been done, which is unacceptable, I might have taken that a little. That might have gone up a little bit up the food chain.
And they are very, Adrian, they are very, very serious allegations. There are many things within this dossier. I haven't read every word of it, but I looked through it today, and there are many serious allegations about Middle East coverage, about problems with the coverage of trans issues, for example. You would have imagined that this would have set off quite a number of flashing lights in senior BBC management, and they would have said, actually, hold on a second, there's a lot in this, we need to look into this, rather than burying it. Adrian?
Well, I think it is very much a case of burying it and kicking the can down the road, in the hope that actually this will all sort of be washed over in months to come, and there will be something else that we'll be talking about. But whatever you're going to say, and this is the problem, is the BBC, highly respected around the world. You mentioned the word BBC, people, oh, wow, their credibility is shot as a result of this. The most powerful man in the world talking about suing the BBC for a vast fortune. I hope we're not seeing the demise of the BBC. I tell you what is very important. Whoever takes this job now has got to do one hell of a job to convince people to pay a licence fee and to continue watching the BBC, because they're on very, very thin ice with this.
Adrian, thank you. That's Adrian Mills there, former BBC presenter. We also heard from Akhil Ahmed, who is a former head of religion and ethics at the BBC. Thanks to both. Mark in Dorset says, good afternoon, Peter. Good afternoon, Mark. Why are the BBC saying mistakes were made? This splicing of a speech wasn't a mistake, it was deliberate, says Mark. Kelvin says, good afternoon, Peter. The people of the BBC are in denial. They are far left, biased. If they can attack if they can attack the right with lies, they are happy. But why is it that only the public in Britain pays the licence fee for it? It's broadcasting worldwide, and the rest of the world watches this rubbish for free. It would make sense to go pay-per-view like Sky did. They need AI to sort them out, like this corrupt government, not artificial intelligence, but AI. Actual intelligence, says Kelvin in Macclesfield. And Donna in Birmingham also says, I wish they would stop saying it was a mistake. Did they fall into a cutting machine for the Trump video? It's not done like that anymore, it's all digital these days. Did they fall into the cutting machine, and then did they accidentally fall on the tape to snag them together to edit a complete untruth about Trump's speech? I think not, says Donna in Birmingham. Well, Pat is in London and would like to give me, and has very kindly given me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Pat, you're on the air. What would you like to say?
Well, good afternoon.
Hi there.
Yeah, I mean, hasn't anybody told Donald Trump that he's not suing the BBC because they've got no money except what they get off the licence payers, off the British public? He's suing, so he's basically, technically, suing people in Britain.
Yeah, all of whom, well, many of whom, of course, pay the licence fee. It's interesting, the three demands the President Trump has: immediately issuing a full and fair retraction of the documentary and any and all other false, defamatory, disparaging, misleading and inflammatory statements about President Trump in as conspicuous a manner as they were originally published. Number two, immediately issuing an apology for the false, defamatory, disparaging, misleading and inflammatory statements about President Trump. And number three, appropriately compensate President Trump for the harm caused. Do you think he's going to win, Pat? What do you think is going to happen?
Oh, I don't know, really. But the thing is that he's going to sue. Well, in a small way, he's going to be suing me as well. Yeah, well, the money would come from us, wouldn't it, Pat? Do you think he shouldn't sue them? Do you think he should try to get redress in another way? Well, yeah, because somebody ought to tell him that BBC, it's like local councils. They've got no money except what they get off the residents in the borough.
It's a fair point, Pat, and thank you for it. That was Pat in London there. Tony says President Trump can impose a further 10% tariff on the UK and cancel major investment into the UK. Anything is possible. Just on what Pat said there, he's partially right, of course. There are other revenue streams. The BBC sell their programmes all over the world. They have money that they make. They make programmes for other people as well through BBC Studios and so on. The BBC will pay for the new ballroom at the White House, says Tony. Tony, I don't know if you know what the new White House ballroom is going to be called. I found this out the other day. It's amazing. Do you know what the new ballroom at the White House is going to be called? It's going to be called the Donald J. Trump Ballroom. Yeah, very on brand. Lots to talk about in this. Let me know your thoughts. 0344 499 1000. We'll get Jack Elsom's view in just a second on this and the other big political story of the day, which is Rachel Reeves failing to rule out tax rises. I think it's going to happen Wednesday, 2 weeks. Full coverage, of course, here on Talk. We'll speak to Jack Elsom, political editor of The Sun, in just a second and get your call in too. 0344 499 1000.
Big news coming this December. Our talkTV app is moving to the Talk app. You can watch, catch up and listen to all your favourite shows and podcasts anytime, anywhere, all on the Talk app. From Monday, 1st of December, the talkTV app will no longer exist, so don't miss out. So head over to your App Store or Google Play and search Talk now.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Thank you to Tad in Cambridge, who says, well said, Peter, the BBC hierarchy are so arrogant they think accountability to the public who pays their wages is optional. Tracy says, Mr. Ahmed, a mistake is using the wrong flour when you're baking. What the editorial team did was a deliberate choice. Please stop minimising this from the BBC. Is there any wonder why people mistrust the mainstream media? Graham says, why do all these ex-BBC people keep saying this was a mistake? It was nothing of the sort. This was a deliberate act to show Trump in the worst possible light, as was the Hamas interview, the programme the Gaza programme, and the Bob Villan tirade. Well, we'll return to that later, of course. And Angela says, good afternoon, Peter. The BBC are biased. The edit promoted misinformation. The licence fee must go and let them self-fund. How they say they were non-biased is just not true. We will return to that story right throughout the programme, but I wanted to, and I will in fact ask Jack Elsom about it in a second, the political editor of The Sun. But I want to just talk about another story. This is the Chancellor failing to rule out tax rises. She spoke to Radio 5 Live earlier on today about this.
Have been really clear that we are looking at both taxes and spending as part of this budget. The economic circumstances have deteriorated since a year ago because of those conflicts, because of those trade barriers, and as a result, we are having to look at taxes and spending, and it's got to be both of those things. And the speech I made last week was about setting the context for the budget, which is a difficult one. And I think people can see that, and they understand why this is a difficult budget and why there are things that have happened in the last year that we couldn't have foreseen a year ago.
Jack Elsom is The Sun's political editor. Jack, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Peter.
Conflicts, trade barriers, those are clearly the big issues. Absolutely nothing to do with anything Rachel Reeves has done, her mismanagement of the economy, putting up national insurance, killing jobs. Nothing to do with her, of course. It's all external factors. That's the reason she has to put up taxes, isn't it?
Yes, totally. And we saw it last week, and we're seeing it again now. Rachel Reeves embarking on a circular firing squad blame game of absolutely everyone but herself. She blames Brexit. She blames the OBR. She blames the Tories. She blames Donald Trump. She blames other tariff barriers.
I think it's your fault, Jack. I think it's your fault.
Well, I'm sure that everyone on this planet will come in for some sort of criticism at the moment until there's only one person left, and that's when she that's when she needs to look in the mirror, because there have been, I think, serious failings over the last year. And listen, I do understand, I do appreciate that this is challenging economic times, and lots of countries around the world are grappling with this. But, and it is a big but, large parts of the economy and the state of the economy clearly. And you hear this from businesses day after day after day. I mean, your and my inbox will probably be absolutely filled with various business groups saying that the national insurance hike last year and some of the other, unbusiness friendly measures that have come in is really hampering their growth and productivity. And so clearly she needs to accept this. I don't think she will accept this. And it looks like, again, we're going to have a budget of pretty meaty tax rises. And, businesses is one thing, and clearly business taxes feed down to consumers. But the fact she is now considering pressing the nuclear button and ripping up that manifesto pledge not to raise income tax, she'd be raising it for the first time in 50 years. I don't think she quite understands yet just how politically toxic that will be if she ends up doing it.
And complete 180 on exactly what she'd done before. You're right, she does need to look into the mirror and say, magic mirror on the wall, who's the unfairest of them all when it comes to taxation. I want to talk about the BBC now. The organisation clearly in crisis, with Tim Davie resigning. Lots of political reaction to this as well, not least from President Trump threatening to sue them for $1 billion.
Yeah, I mean, it's crisis time at the BBC. They've clearly, it has felt, to be fair, in a state of perma-crisis these past few years, and they just seem to lurch from one scandal to the next, but clearly now back in the spotlight after both Tim Davie and Deborah Turness forced to resign on the back of largely that Panorama episode about Donald Trump, where they doctored one of his speeches to make it look like he was inciting violence at the Capitol on January 2021. Donald Trump has clearly come out and said that he wants a full and fair retraction of the documentary by November 14th. Otherwise, he's going to launch a lawsuit for as much as $1 billion. Now, it's unclear at the moment exactly what he means by this, because I believe that the documentary itself has actually been taken down from iPlayer. It hasn't been there for quite a while, so we'll have to see the back and forth between the White House and the BBC on that one. Samir Shah, the chairman, has come out today and, as expected, apologised for the deceptive editing of that Panorama episode. But I think many people looking at this will think, and clearly Donald Trump is grabbing the headlines here, but it does go way beyond that. And we've heard today various apologies for several mistakes as they've been called, which have happened under Tim Davies' watch. But at what point, and this is the question which people are asking and critics are answering, at what point do mistakes stop being individual blunders but actually speak to a deeper, more systemic problem? And the problem which many people are pointing to, many of the opponents of the BBC, are institutional liberal biases. Sorry, I'm just getting a call. I'm going to have to try and...
You're a popular man, Jack. You're a popular man.
Sorry, I was trying to work out how to get my my camera back. Am I back?
I think you're back now. It is mildly terrifying to people watching on a sort of widescreen television when you see your huge kind of almost it could be you sort of finger there. Maybe they'll win the lottery.
Sorry.
You cut you off in your prime there. You were saying.
No, I was just saying, and so the problem now is how the BBC goes around reassuring people that it is not just, institutionally liberal left wing as many of its opponents think it is. And actually,
so many of our viewers and listeners, Jack, saying this wasn't a mistake per se. A mistake is, using the conditioner when you meant to use the shampoo. This is actually something that many people will see as deliberately distorting the views and the words of the President of the United States a week before an election. Well, I don't expect it necessarily had much of an effect on the election, which he of course won. But the point is that this institutional bias is given succor through that, as well as the 19-page report in terms of things like Middle East bias, in terms of trans rights, lots of other ways in which this comes across, Jack.
Yeah, definitely. And, there are many journalists at the BBC that take their duty to impartiality incredibly seriously.
Absolutely correct.
Many of them are friends of mine and probably yours.
Yep.
And we get to know lots of them in politics. But there is a sense that lots of them who work at the BBC headquarters have all come from the same walks of life. They all believe exactly the same thing. And therefore, they don't seem to really take umbrage many of the things which most of the public will find totally awful. And that's why you get, the BBC almost eulogizing the son of a Hamas minister. It's why you get Bob Villan's anti-Semitic chants live streamed.
Jack, I was working for Newsnight in 2010 when the Labour leadership election was happening between David Miliband, Ed Miliband, Ed Bowles and Diane Abbott and Andy Burnham as well. And there was a senior person going around BBC Westminster at that point, at that time when that was happening, saying to people, who are you voting for? To which I said, hold on a second, don't you have to be a Labour Party member to do that? So, oh yeah, we're all Labour Party members. I mean, who are you voting for? I said, well, I'm not a member of any political party and I won't be voting for anybody. But I mean, there were literally about a dozen people and he was going around each of them saying who you're voting for. So, maybe Ed Miliband, maybe Ed Bowles. That was the time, that was the one of the number of things that happened when I was there that I just thought, this is outrageous. And actually, there were many people, as you correctly say, friends of mine, colleagues of mine, who are very impartial, who take it very, very seriously. When I was there, I took impartiality incredibly seriously as well, but that shocked me. Let me just ask you about one more thing before you go, Jack, which is the UK seeking Danish inspiration to shake up the immigration system. This is yet another perhaps solution or some form of amelioration for the major crisis in immigration. What are they looking for specifically in regard to what Denmark does and we don't currently do?
Well, Denmark seems to have really got radical with their deterrence, and so what they will do is things like try and make illegal migrants contribute, for example, to the cost of their benefits, to the cost of their hotels. If they are granted right to work in the UK and asylum status, they will make them pay back the costs of their hotels, benefits, whatever. They also don't have much truck with migrants coming sometimes with lots of jewellery. So they had a jewellery law, I think it was a few years ago, they brought it in, which seemed to be pretty successful, in which I think if you have necklaces, rings, whatever, over a certain amount when you come into Denmark, they will take that off you to go towards paying for your accommodation. Family reunion rights have been massively curbed in Denmark, so you can't bring people over to the UK, even if you are granted rights to remain. And so Shabana Mahmood clearly wants to get tougher with our asylum policy. She's going to be laying out a package of measures later this month. And Denmark, I think she's looking at as a sort of blueprint for this. It's not going to be absolutely, a copy and paste job, but it will take influence from that. And the problem with this is that, yes, many right-minded people will think that this is a good thing to do, but already we're getting few bits of clucking from people on her part in her party backbenchers who will be a bit squeamish about doing stuff like this. So it's whether she can get it past the PLP, the Parliamentary Labour Party.
Of course. Jack, thank you. That's Jack Elsom there, political editor at The Sun. What do you think of what he was saying? 0344 499 1000. Sean in Gloucester says, just resign, Rachel. What a load of lies from Rachel Thieves. And someone says, Colin says, hi, the BBC earn 3.5 billion a year on 65% of the licence fee. The rest is earned elsewhere from productions, etc. They have plenty of money in the bank. I hope Trump bankrupts them for their ongoing radical behaviour. A number of people pointing out that they probably have insurance to pay for lawsuits. Dawn and Terence, for example, pointing that out. Well, thank you. And Pete in West Yorkshire as well. Thank you to them for doing that. We'll talk to Graham Stringer in just a second, the Labour MP for Blackley and Middleton South. Stay with us.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Stephen Millings in Belfast says, in 25 years of watching BBC Question Time with Dimbleby, I never knew his politics. Do you know, I worked with Dimbleby for a year. I never knew his politics. Within 2 weeks of Fiona Bruce, I knew hers when she showed her bias on a Brexit debate when she suppressed a Leave guest, Ian Deal, from speaking and kept interrupting. David would never have done that, says Stephen. Jane says, once the President is finished with the BBC, you could help many of your audience who would like him to have a word with the PM on their behalf. Thanks also to Jason in the Lake District, who says, as not many migrants have been sent back under the one-in, one-out scheme, does anyone know what percentage of people deported out of the scheme have actually returned? Well, we know about 2 anyway. And just to keep watching and listening to us, we love your company here on Drive. I'm here all week, and to see all your favourite presenters and shows and podcasts and all the rest of it. From Monday, the 1st of December, our talkTV app is going to be on the move. All your favourite shows and podcasts will continue over on the Talk app. So if you're watching or listening on the talkTV app right now, you need to delete it and put the Talk app from the App Store or Google Play on your phone or device. I did that myself. I did it in a break last week. It took a couple of minutes. If I can do it, you can too. They don't allow me near any buttons here. As an arts graduate, we keep Tech Up Dave for those purposes. He keeps us on air and make sure you can hear and see me, as well as a great team behind the glass that support me every day. Let's talk about the BBC with Graham Stringer MP. He's the Labour MP for Blackley and Middleton South. Graham, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
How can we trust the BBC again? Do you trust the BBC?
Not with the current management. I haven't trusted them for a long time. I've always wanted to trust them. And until perhaps 20 odd years ago, I did trust them. Certainly the news service, I thought they were getting it right.
What changed? What changed for you, Graham?
Well, the first time I actually noticed it. There's a long-forgotten report called the Minnesota Report on the 1999 European elections, which showed extraordinary bias against basically the UKIP party, and strangely in favour of a party long forgotten called Conservatives for the Euro. How it was covered, the amounts of time. There have been 5 reports since then showing bias on Europe, and the BBC know they're doing it because they were biased before and after the European referendum. Again, there's more reports on that, but during the time of the actual referendum, they were perfectly well balanced. So they know they can do it when they had to, when there were legal definitions, but otherwise they carry on with their own prejudiced views, putting those forward and not an objective analysis.
Although they were often criticised for having too many Remainer guests during the 2016 referendum, a factor of 3 to 2, I think I remember reading, and that's been criticised. With the latest problems, Graham, this seems to me to be a classic case of whistleblower or bad report attempt to get buried, then it comes out into the open, and then people take responsibility and saying, I'm doing the right thing, I'm doing an integrity resignation. But they're not, are they? They're resigning because they've been found out.
That's absolutely right. And Prescott, the man who wrote the report, tried to get through to the chair of the BBC, and he was completely ignored. And now he's saying there's no systemic problem in the BBC, but he's part of a systemic problem. He should be one of a large number of people at the top of the BBC who lose their jobs just for ignoring that report. But you can go through a whole list of things, not just Europe, the way Gaza's been covered, son of a Hamas activist not declared on a BBC documentary. There's a failure to cover the women in the northeast who want their own separate changing rooms, and they don't want men in it, whatever those men describe themselves as. So I can go on if you like.
Yeah, well, there's so many things within that report.
They take advice on things like trans issues from Stonewall, which is not an expert body. It is a campaigning body, and they're entitled to campaign. But the BBC choose to get them to advise them technically. Same with climate. They go to Friends of the Earth and other campaigning groups, all fine in their own right, but they're not neutral experts.
Well, I have the 19-page report here. I have it in front of me, and there are so many different criticisms. You've mentioned a few of them as well: US election coverage, racial diversity.
I've lost your sound.
Yeah, we're slightly struggling with the sound, Graham. Maybe I could ask you.
I'm sorry, I've lost.
Okay, we'll leave it there with Graham. We had a few audio issues, but Graham speaking complete sense as usual. John is in Sutton and has given me a ring at 0344 499 1000. John, what do you make of what Trump is proposing to do?
It's getting more serious by the hour, Peter.
You're right.
I'm listening to you on the radio, and I'm watching all the news channels flicking the sound down, and it says Trump threatens to sue for $1 billion. He's got his lawyers onto him.
That's right.
This is looking more serious every day now. The thing that the BBC need to do, Peter, in my view, is to get in touch with Nigel Farage.
Get him to smooth it over?
Try and get him to smooth it over. At least help them, you know?
Yeah.
Even like as a go-between.
Well, it's interesting.
They've got till Friday.
Yeah. It's interesting what Farage was saying, actually. Can we hear that clip again, just of what Farage was saying at a press conference earlier today? And then I'll come back to you, John, just to remind ourselves what Nigel Farage was saying earlier on today. Let's listen to this clip.
Going to defund the BBC from its current model, be in no doubt about that. The BBC, under our plans, would be slimmed down to something very relatively small, but most of it would move to a subscription model to compete in the open market. You know, do I want it to have a basic role for news and current affairs? Yes, but it's going to have to be very, very different to the way it is now.
What sort of BBC would you want, John, just reacting to what Nigel Farage, the leader of Reform UK, was saying to Jeremy there on air this morning?
I'd like exactly the one he just described.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
okay.
I do.
Okay.
I do. And I don't think he's been over-condemned condemning of the BBC in this, Peter. Really.
Okay.
I know he's been. He knows it's a very serious situation.
Sure.
He hasn't gone in sort of like fist flying at him, has he?
Yeah, he hasn't gone all guns blazing. You're absolutely right. John, listen, thank you. That's John in Sutton there. Another person says mistakes weren't made, fraud occurred. Someone fraudulently edited 2 videos to intentionally discredit a political candidate. He happens to be the president of our closest ally. Many heads need to roll. Sackings and namings and shamings and not resignations. Myra has given me a ring from Lincolnshire. Myra, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Peter, I think it's an utter disgrace. I wouldn't trust the BBC after their carry-on of Martin Bashir, with the carry-on with Diana and the false paperwork that he produced then. There's like this Pinocchio of a Prime Minister and his puppets. There's disgraceful. I'm an old-age pensioner. My husband's got dementia. We don't get any help whatsoever, and yet they're spending money left, right and centre on false news. It's disgusting. Absolutely disgusting.
When you do you watch the BBC, Mara? Do you watch the news? Do you listen to what they say?
Sorry?
Do you watch the BBC? Do you use it as a news source, or do you watch other programmes on it?
No, I don't, Peter. I have not watched the BBC for years. We're still paying a licence for it, and I don't watch them. I use all the other payment channels.
Okay.
You know, it's disgusting. They've actually destroyed themselves in the world stage. They're like Keir Starmer. He's destroyed himself on the world stage. He's got no backbone, and neither have the BBC. They're disgusting. Absolutely disgusting. You've only got to trace the records like Gary Lineker, Hugh Edwards.
Yeah, well, Myra, you make a lot of sense there. I think a lot of people will agree with you. Thank you for that. I think it's the first time we've spoken. Let's not make it the last. You're welcome to giving me a ring anytime, as is anyone watching or listening. 0344 499 1000. If you disagree with me, you think I'm talking nonsense, that's okay, because we disagree without being disagreeable. Yesterday on the show between 10 and 1, I do Saturday and Sunday between 10 and 1, there were a couple of people disagreeing with me there. And you know what? The world has continued to turn. We're going to talk in just a second to the Home Affairs correspondent of The Sun about the migrant deported to France returning to the UK on a small boat. This is the second time this has happened in just a few weeks. Also, the UK seeking inspiration from Denmark to shake up the immigration system. Will it work? Let me know your thoughts. 0344 499 1000. Stay with us.
Big news coming this December. Our talkTV app is moving to the Talk app. You can watch, catch up and listen to all your favourite shows and podcasts anytime, anywhere, all on the Talk app. From Monday, 1st of December, the Talk TV app will no longer exist, so don't miss out. So head over to your App Store or Google Play and search Talk now.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Thanks to everyone who's been in touch. Pete says it's still always someone else's fault with Labour, reacting to what Rachel Reeves is saying about taxes almost certainly going up. I'd be absolutely astonished if they don't. Terence says if President Trump successfully sues the BBC, the money should come from senior BBC employees' pension funds. That would focus their minds in the future, if they have them. Future, that is, not mine, says Terence. And final one just for the moment from Paul in Belfast, who says if you can't sue the BBC, what about the post office scandal, the blood scandal, grooming gang scandal? They all get money from the public. Using that logic, you can never hold any institution to account if they're in receipt of tax pounds, says Paul in Belfast. Food for thought there. Keep your thoughts coming in. 0344 499 1000. I want to talk about the absolute shambles of yet another migrant on the one in, one out scheme, being who was deported to France, returning to the UK on a small boat. Julia Atherley is right across this, Home Affairs correspondent for The Sun. Tell us the details, Julia. Great to have you in the studio.
Thank you for having me. So yeah, this is a man who we understand came back across the channel yesterday. He had been deported previously, sent back to France, has now come back again. He was detected at, the Home Office told us he was kind of detected straight away because you have your fingerprints taken and your identity confirmed when you're processed in the small boat processing centre at Manston. So straight away they knew that he had already been deported. He's been detained again and is now going to be deported again. But as you know, this is the second time this has happened. Last month we had an Iranian man who had been sent back to France and had come back again, has now been sent back again. Bizarrely, the Prime Minister's spokesperson today is saying that this means that it's proof that this is evidence of the system working because he was detected straight away and he was detained.
I mean, that's quite a bizarre thing to say, especially as you've now had two of these people, of not many people, a few dozen people. I don't know if you know off the top of the head the running total of people who've been sent back to France. Was it 50 or 60 people?
It's in the 90s now.
In the 90s, okay.
Yeah, but we've obviously it's it's one in, one out. So far we've had in the 50s number of people coming from this, coming our way.
Yes.
That's what they're saying is it's evidence that it's working. But also in the last 4 days we've had more than 2,000 people cross the channel. So if this is supposed to be a deterrent, it's not yet up and running.
And these two people haven't been put off, and those thousands of people haven't been put off as well either. So in your view, is this working at all?
I mean, just from the numbers alone, more than 2,000 people in the last 4 days, and then only 94 are actually being sent back. So I think most people would fancy their chances if they could,
They're not going to be put off, are they?
Yeah. Exactly.
What about the Danish solution? I was talking to Jack Elsom a little bit about this earlier, but the UK seeking inspiration from Denmark. There's some similarities between us and Denmark. Obviously, we're different countries in many ways, but in terms of the fact that there's a centre-left government and there is an immigration problem, which Denmark seems to have dealt with fairly well, or at least made more progress than we have. What's your reading on this, Julia?
Yeah, I mean, well, the Danish system, they managed to get the number of asylum claims they're processing down to a 40-year low. So you can see why the Labour government are looking to what they're doing over there and what's gone on. So as part of that, it would be, I think one of the main policies they're looking at is this reducing refugee status to a temporary stay. So as soon as our government rules that country that you're from is now safe, you can then be returned, and that's what's happened in Denmark. And also tighter rules on family reunion. So you'd have to be able to provide a financial guarantee to bring members of your family over if you're here as a refugee. and that you'd have to prove that you hadn't claimed benefits for 3 years. And also you'd have to take a language test. They currently have to take a Danish language test over there as well. So these are all things being considered. So we understand there's going to be a big shake-up of the asylum system announced later this month by the Home Secretary.
I mean, we've had shake-ups previously. We've had all sorts of legislation announced over the summer. Do you feel they're getting any form of grip on this? Are they moving in the right direction here? Because there seem to be lots of announcements, but is there actually much change?
I think there's a lot of I think Shabana Mahmood has said that she's willing to do whatever it takes, and she's really her language has been very hard line. And, for example, we've seen the increase in the visa skilled worker allowance, to be able to come over here as a skilled worker, the amount that you have to be paid has gone up. So, that, there are those things having effect. But in terms of the numbers that we look at every day, in terms of the numbers in the asylum system and the number of people coming over in small boats, is not having any effect.
Yeah, and she, of course, was seen as someone who was quite tough at the Ministry of Justice, but the heat seems to be on David Lammy, certainly about these prisoner releases. 2 people that we know of still on the loose by the sound of things?
I think it's 3.
3?
Yeah,
okay.
3 still on the loose who've been accidentally released, in the past couple of months. But it's just that is kind of just really highlights what a shambles that whole system is in. And I
enjoyed David Lammy saying, well, actually, the problem with Billy Smith, they couldn't cope with 2 people called Smith, which you would think would be a reasonable thing, given that Smith is the most common English surname. They couldn't cope with 2 people called Smith, and he said, oh, well, actually, the problem wasn't in the prison system, the problem was in the court system. I mean, I've got a terrible piece of news for you, Justice Secretary. You're also responsible for the court system, so that's also on you. Is there any sense of that getting any better, any sense of David Lammy coming to the House of Commons maybe tomorrow to give some sort of statement on that? Do we know if that's going to happen?
So he will address the House of Commons tomorrow, and we've heard in the last couple of hours Robert Jenrick's given him an ultimatum, and he's given him a list of questions about how he wants him to tell the House of Commons how many people have been released in error since April the 1st. And he says that if he can't come to the House of Commons and tell us that, then he should resign. So pretty strong words from Jenrick.
Very interesting. We'll see what the Justice Secretary says tomorrow. Of course, we'll bring you full coverage of that here on Talk. For the meantime, Julia, thank you. That's Julia Atherley there, Home Affairs correspondent of The Sun. We'll check in with the paper later on with their news desk. I think it's Tom Seward today, the assistant news editor, who will tell us what's coming up on the programme. It's coming up in the paper tomorrow, I should say. Thank you to the person who's texted in saying, knowing how idiotic the BBC are, don't be surprised to see Gary Lineker get the vacant Director General job. Gosh, if Gary Lineker becomes Director General, I think we can all go home. Ian in Essex says, leave the BBC alone. The Labour government is modelled on its shows. The Clangers, the Wombles, Bill and Ben, the Wooden Tops, Andy Panty, Ragtag and Bobtail. Ian, you're showing your age with that one. I just about remember those repeats of Andy Pandy. Goodness me. Although the Wombles did make a comeback, I think, when I was a bit of a teenager. Tim in Brighton says, good afternoon. Who else is our hopeless Chancellor going to blame? Sunshine, Moonlight, Good Times? I know she will blame it on the boogie. Great show, as always. Yes, Rachel Reeves, of course, blaming everyone but herself. Maybe she needs to take a look in the mirror. Although she could take a look in the Sun for better coverage. John Whittingdale is with us next, the former Culture Secretary. He is a Conservative MP and will tell us his take on the many problems the BBC is having and what your view too. Stay with us.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
Well, a very good evening. It's just gone 5 o'clock. I'm Peter Cardwell. Thank you so much for your company here on Talk Drive. We're here right through until 7 and I'm here all week. There's lots to discuss, particularly about the BBC, which is being sued or could be sued for $1 billion by Donald Trump, the President of the United States, because of their errors. Now their Chief Executive of News and the Director General of the organisation have resigned. Also, the Chancellor says today that taxes will almost certainly go up. That's basically what she said. We'll also talk about that. We'll also talk about more than 200 Jewish staff accusing the BBC of ignoring their calls for an anti-Semitism probe. There are lots of BBC people, senior people like John Simpson, Nick Robinson. They're coming out fighting today, but should they actually be a bit more humble in the face of the fact that the BBC has been caught doctoring a clip by Trump and two of its very senior people, most senior people, have resigned as a result. I was on there last night on the BBC News. I was asked on, and I will play you a little bit of that in a second. Loads to discuss, lots of opinions coming into this building. Whatever yours is, let me know. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV. Follow me at Peter Cardwell. You can send me a WhatsApp voice note. We'll take some of those this hour. Tech Up Dave will listen through them and we'll play them out. You can also send me a WhatsApp text message, or you can give me a ring, all on the main number 0344 499 1000. Stay with us here on Talk. Well, first on Talk Drive, I want to take a look at what the outgoing CEO of BBC News, Deborah Turness, said about whether or not the broadcaster is biased. She said this earlier on today.
I would like to say it has been the privilege of my career to serve as the CEO of BBC News and to work with our brilliant team of journalists. I stepped down over the weekend because the buck stops with me. But I'd like to make one thing very clear. BBC News is not institutionally biased. That's why it's the world's most trusted news provider. Of course our journalists aren't corrupt. Our journalists are hard-working people who strive for impartiality, and I will stand by their journalism.
Is there institutional bias at the BBC?
There is no institutional bias. Mistakes are made, but there's no institutional bias.
But why weren't the mistakes dealt with on Trump, on anti-Semitism, on women's rights?
I'm sure that story will emerge.
Classic BBC there. You have a senior BBC correspondent, Lucy Manning, asking the outgoing chief executive of the BBC on the steps of the BBC as the BBC chief executive of News goes into work whether BBC journalists are corrupt. That's the way it goes, folks. Earlier today, Nigel Farage, the leader of Reform UK, spoke to Talk, in fact spoke to Jeremy on breakfast about the BBC. This is what Nigel Farage said.
I'm going to defund the BBC from its current model, be in no doubt about that. The BBC, under our plans, would be slimmed down to something very relatively small, but most of it would move to a subscription model to compete in the open market. You know, do I want it to have a basic role for news and current affairs? Yes, but it's going to have to be very, very different to the way it is now.
Well, I was invited on the BBC News channel to comment on this last night. This is a clip of what I said about 8:30 last night on the BBC News channel. It is a cultural problem, unlike what Deborah Turness said. Deborah Turness and Tim Davie, two incredibly important people until today in the BBC, but the problem is the culture of the BBC. And I must say that I worked for BBC News, I worked for Newsnight, I worked for Question Time, I've worked in BBC Northern Ireland for the cumulative total of about 3 years. I have many friends and colleagues, many who did an incredibly good job, and I'm sure there are still very many people, I know there are many people at the BBC who do great work and take impartiality very, very seriously. The problem is that we pay the licence fee for the BBC to be impartial. It hasn't been impartial recently on a number of issues, and it wasn't Deborah Turness or Tim Davie who doctored the clip of Donald Trump so that it didn't tell the truth. It wasn't Deborah Turness or Tim Davie who had put the trans guidance out, for example, or sanctioned Martine Croxall. It wasn't Tim Davie or Deborah Turness who decided that certain things should go on the BBC Verify website that were then taken down for being wrong. There are major, major problems here. I wouldn't have dreamt of doing an edit like they did on Donald Trump, for example. That wouldn't have entered my head when I was a BBC employee. It wouldn't enter my head now as a journalist still. And I think that clearly there are many problems right throughout this. Also with the Gaza documentary, why has the executive producer of that not been held to account? Why have people not been forced to resign or sacked as a result of that? There's much more to this. Yes, well done for Deborah Turness for falling on her sword. She should have done that a long time ago, as should Tim Davie. But there are many other people that need to be held to account for this. And if things don't change properly, if the culture doesn't change, and if the BBC doesn't get back to those Reithian values of doing the right thing, of acting impartially for the licence fee we pay them, well then its future as an organisation, particularly as a news organisation, is in doubt when we see the last 3 Directors General having to resign because of serious editorial failings. Well, that was the BBC News Channel last night. I was asked to contribute to it, and those were my thoughts. The whole interview is on my Twitter, at Peter Cardwell. I want to speak to Sir John Whittingdale now. He is a Conservative MP and the former Culture Secretary. Sir John, can the BBC get the trust back that it needs?
Well, it's very important that they should. The BBC still has a vital role as a trusted public service broadcaster in an age when social media and disinformation is rife. Viewers need to be able to know that they can go to the BBC and trust what it says. And that is why these recent revelations are so damaging, because they have shaken that trust. And I regard them as incredibly serious, and I am very concerned that it's taken until now for the BBC really to act upon them. These were concerns being expressed within the organisation, quite a number of weeks ago, but it wasn't until the Daily Telegraph went and revealed the contents of the report, and even then nothing then happened until last night, when suddenly we discovered that BBC, the Director General and the Head of News were going to resign.
There is a huge amount of defiance as well from some of its senior employees. Nick Robinson, for example, former political editor, now a presenter of the Today programme on Radio 4, saying that he believes that at least some of this is a politically motivated attack. James Landale, his former deputy, who's now diplomatic correspondent, says, amid all the guff, just this, I am proud to work for BBC News and even prouder to work alongside so many outstanding colleagues. Is it guff to criticise the BBC?
No, of course it's not guff, and these are very, very serious revelations about failures of editorial standards. I mean, in particular, the Panorama programme, which doctored the speech of Donald Trump to convey a completely misleading impression. I mean, that was a very serious matter, which the BBC, as soon as it was discovered, they should have said that this was unacceptable, apologised for it, and publicly broadcast that. Instead, even today, we've been told it's an error of judgment, which they knew about, but decided, didn't merit going any further. I think that seems to me a huge mistake and an underestimate of the damage that individual episode alone has done.
And when you say things like, and when we hear phrases like error of judgment, mistake, that actually minimises this to some degree, in my view, because we've got a situation where that minimises the possibility of a cultural bias, as if this would somehow have happened in a documentary about Kamala Harris, for example, which I doubt very much. I wonder, from your experience, from your oversight, from your role previously as Culture Secretary, do you think there is a culture at the BBC that is institutionally biased?
That has been a concern, but it's been expressed over a long period, and I do think there is evidence to suggest it. I mean, if you go right back to issues like the Brexit referendum, when the BBC gave every impression that they couldn't believe actually anybody would vote in support of it, and then equally the debate around immigration, which was downplayed, and the BBC themselves said that they got that wrong, that they didn't fully understand the depth of feeling that people had about it, and I think
why is that, though? Sorry to interrupt you, Sir John.
Because the BBC is to some extent, it's made up of a lot of people from a similar background with a similar view of the world, and they are far too disconnected from the people, ordinary working class people up and down this country who feel very strongly about these issues, and somehow the BBC don't seem to appreciate how strongly people do feel, and that has been a criticism for a long time, and that's something which we have tried to address in terms of the governance structure, but clearly more work needs to be done.
What should happen in regard to Donald Trump and his certainly talking about suing the BBC. He says he has three demands, or his lawyers say there are three demands: immediately issue a full and fair retraction of the documentary and any and all other false, defamatory, disparaging, misleading and inflammatory statements about President Trump in as conspicuous a manner as they were originally published. Number two, immediately issue an apology for the false, defamatory, disparaging, misleading and inflammatory statements about President Trump. And three, appropriately compensate President Trump for the harm caused. They're talking about $1 billion. Should someone in the government go to the US, perhaps, to speak to Donald Trump? If you were still Culture Secretary, would you go? Would you try to intervene? Or is this simply something the BBC needs to sort out by itself?
I think, the BBC is a publicly owned broadcaster. It's publicly funded. Ultimately, the government has a responsibility to the BBC. Now, the BBC operate at arm's length. They're independent. But when something like this happens, which may do real damage to our relations with our closest ally, I think it is something which, the government should say that we take very seriously, and that, we will be looking to make sure that the BBC in future maintains the highest possible standards and does not produce reports which are factually incorrect and present a misleading picture in the way that this one did.
What do you think the BBC needs to do to avoid a fourth Director General in a row resigning because of an editorial issue with BBC News?
I've been involved with the BBC, first as chair of the Culture, Media and Sports Select Committee, then as Secretary of State, and then media for a very long period. And you're right, there have been a succession of editorial failings going back over many years, and an awful lot of senior members of the BBC have, at one time or another, had to resign because of those. And what I don't want to see is, two people who I have no reason to believe aren't, professional journalists and people of integrity, but who have accepted that their position required them to resign. What I don't want is for their replacements come in, 6 months later, something else will happen, and then they have to resign. So what needs to happen is that we address the real root cause, which is the editorial failings. And we're in a period of charter renewal. So firstly, the new Director General, whoever that is, needs to get a group very quickly.
Who should it be? Who would your choice be?
That's a matter for the board of BBC. The only thing
I'm giving you the choice right now, Sir John. You can have anyone you want. Who would you want? Apart from yourself.
I'd love to do it, but I don't think that would go. I don't think that's a realistic possibility. No, but what I would say is that I hope that it's not somebody who is, a BBC lifer, someone who's spent their entire career within the BBC, which all too often in the past is who it has been. If you look at the names being bandied around, some already are people who've spent most of their time at the BBC, and therefore, if you want to try and address the concern about the culture, I think the first thing you need is somebody at the top who is brought in from outside and has not been inculcated with that and can take a much more objective view of what needs to be done.
Sir John, thank you. Sir John Whittingdale, there, Conservative MP and former Culture Secretary. Let's speak to a couple of callers. 0344 499 1000 is the number to ring to get your voice on the air. Phil's in Hull. Let's speak to Phil. What would you like to say?
Oh, good afternoon, Peter.
Hi there.
Good show. Enjoying it as usual.
Thank you. That's very kind. Thank you.
I know I'm probably 81, I'm probably out of all this, but how can you call a mistake splicing two different things together to create another thing?
Yeah.
And then say it's a mistake? A mistake to me is putting the wrong Christmas card in the wrong envelope.
Listen,
that's a mistake.
Phil, you're absolutely right, and don't do yourself down. I think that is a really reasonable thing to say. People say, an error of judgment. Well, actually, this wasn't carelessness, was it?
No, it was a deliberate. And the thing is, I think most people would say that this group think anti-right, anything anti-right. I mean, the only person they admonish is Croxall for telling the truth.
Yeah, Martine Croxall, that BBC presenter who changed pregnant people to women, yeah.
She said women, which is true. They wouldn't have J.K. Rowling on or the interview because of the trans lobby within there. I mean, Jeremy Bowen, I used to have a bit of respect for, still won't apologise for talking about Israel bombing that hospital when it was patently obvious from the cars in the car park that had been burnt out.
Well, do you know what, Phil? We're actually going to talk more in just a minute about that with Jake Wallace-Simons and the anti-Israel bias and the 200 Jewish staff accusing the BBC of ignoring their calls for an anti-Semitism probe. So stay tuned for that, and thanks for your call, Phil. I just want to get Grace in from London, who's given me a ring. Grace, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Hi. I'm struggling to gather whether the BBC is biased one way or the other on the political spectrum, but I would say it's fair to argue that it's got a liberal bias, which is not necessarily the same as left. And so when Trump kind of came on the political scene, I thought it'd be more accurate to look at what he says for himself. I wouldn't presume that any news outlet could be wholly accurate, partly because all human beings are flawed and fallible, and news organisations will sometimes make
that's
mistakes.
right, Grace, but you know, we make mistakes occasionally. I said something I said last week, for example, I said that India and China weren't at the COP30. I later found out that was wrong. The next day, first thing I did was said, look, I'm really sorry, I should have said India and China were at COP30 at the big environmental conference. I got that wrong. 3-hour shows, sometimes you make but that was an honest mistake, and I made that very clear. What's perhaps not an honest mistake, Grace, is putting together a bit of a speech from nearly an hour later. I mean, that's much more serious.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, because I thought the best thing to do would be to look at Trump's own words, I followed him on social media for a while to see what he said for himself. And I was really horrified by various aspects of his attitude, because I really believe that we should have compassion for human beings from elsewhere, and also that we should have humility. I believe as a Christian that's really important, because
Has the BBC got humility today, though, Grace? It's fine to simply say President Trump has said this, Starmer said this, Reeves has said that, to say it accurately, to represent it, and then let people make up their minds. But my problem with the BBC today is that quite a number of senior people, Nick Robinson, James Landale and others, John Simpson as well, are really becoming very, very defensive and saying that they're being attacked here and this is all a campaign.
Yeah, well, I was making the point about Trump that his lack of humility frustrated me, and I was coming on to say that I think that the Panorama program edit was completely unacceptable, and that Trump is dangerous even without an edit. You don't need to edit him to make him look dramatic and dangerous. But you're quite right, there's a lack of humility amongst people at the top of the BBC, and I think that it's really important that they address some of the failures that have gone on, because they need to report on the most important or powerful man in the world accurately.
Yeah, and for us to be confident that they're doing that accurately, as well as licence fee payers. Grace, thank you. That's Grace in London there. Leslie says, absolutely not. Please do not suggest a member of this government goes over to the UK. The USA, I should say. They will make it worse. Lammy or Nandy, no, says Leslie. Yeah, I think sending Lammy would not be the best idea. Sending him anywhere wouldn't be the best idea, although maybe to his constituency, to serve his constituents and on the back benches. Peter on the BBC, Amanda says, the mighty have fallen. The old soldier speaking at the weekend said it is all about his great disappointment and the decline of standards in this country. The BBC is a perfect example. Yeah, that was Alec Penston, who was on Good Morning Britain, and certainly we played that clip a number of times over Friday and into the weekend. He was dreadfully sad about what this country has become, and lots of reaction to that. And if you want to continue to react to that, this is my show, but it's your show too. If you want to get your voice on the air about that, by all means give me a ring, 0344 499 1000. Jake Wallace-Simons is coming next on specifically the problems with the BBC in regard to the Middle East. Forced to correct 2 Gaza stories a week. John Simpson, the World Affairs editor, coming out fighting. Jeremy Bowen has had all sorts of problems and has said things that I strongly disagree with on a factual basis on the news, it must be said. And also a junior doctor who joked about gassing the Jews. Well, he's let off with a warning. Britain 2025. Jake Wallace-Simons is next. Stay with us for that. You're not going to want to miss it. And make sure you get your reaction. Give me a ring, 0344 499 1000.
Big news coming this December. Our talkTV app is moving to the Talk app. You can watch, catch up and listen to all your favourite shows and podcasts anytime, anywhere, all on the Talk app. From Monday, 1st of December, the talkTV app will no longer exist, so don't miss out. So head over to your App Store or Google Play and search Talk now.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Rafi has been in touch on Twitter to say this government are just not as intelligent as the Danish. They'll screw it up as they always do. Amy says it's going to be awkward the next time Trump meets Starmer and Trump mentions all of this. Also, Ed Davey has written a letter to the Prime Minister urging him to condemn Trump's attack on the BBC. The BBC edited Trump's speech, so if anything, this was an attack on Trump. Surely, I totally agree with you, Amy. Ed Davey said some very crazy, mad things over the last couple of days. Jules says we used to be proud of the BBC. Now it's an embarrassing organisation, activist clown show preaching to us like sixth form students with little grasp of the real world. I want to see its complete demise. It's only for it to be rebuilt and reset to what it used to be. Another person has been in touch, well, quite a few people have been in touch with the BBC. Leslie says the likes of John Simpson and his ilk are the reason the BBC are in this trouble. Arrogant and tone deaf. We'll be talking about that in a second with Jake Wallace-Simons and what these big beasts like John Simpson have been saying, particularly about Middle East coverage. And actually that's another element of this 19-page dossier. I actually have it printed out here. I've looked through most of it. We're going to read the whole thing. This is Michael Prescott's original dossier, now in the public domain, and of course a big bit of it is the coverage of the Middle East and associated issues. We know, of course, Bob Vylan, the singer, I use the term loosely, Pascal Robinson Foster, on the BBC on Glastonbury, he was allowed on for another 40 minutes after that, said death to the IDF. Well, nothing has happened. He was allowed to stay on the BBC. Many people shouted it back, and it's now been 135 days since that happened. No arrest has occurred, and I have an open invitation to Avon and Somerset Police and the Chief Constable, who you can see on the screen there, Sarah Crew, Chief Constable Sarah Crew, to come on my programme to give an explanation about why he hasn't, as far as we know, Pascal Robinson Foster, been interviewed. He certainly hasn't been arrested. He certainly hasn't been charged. We heard from them a couple of weeks ago when they said they'd got some advice from the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service. How long does it take? There need to be consequences for his anti-Semitic actions. It is a disgrace. Let's talk about that, and let's talk about the BBC with Jake Wallace-Simons, the author and columnist, the author of Never Again, How the West Betrayed the Jews and Itself. Jake, there's so many elements to this. First of all, your general reaction to what has happened at the BBC. My view is it needs to go a lot further. There are many more heads that should roll. There are many more changes that need to be made to it institutionally, not least on its coverage of the Middle East. And as we learn that the more than 200 Jewish staff have accused the BBC of anti-Semitism, they've been ignored for months now.
Yeah, I think we've learned a number of lessons from this debacle. One is that the rot seems to run so deep that it's difficult to imagine how it's possible to exercise all that stuff and still leave the BBC intact. Not that I'm calling for the BBC to be in any way dismantled, but the problem is that it seems to be so deeply rooted now. You know, even as the report made clear, even the executives who are in charge of ensuring that mistakes aren't made, that standards are upheld, have become part of the systemic problem because they've ignored and dismissed some totally compelling evidence that bad things were happening at the BBC, not just the Trump, the obscene sort of Trump fake news, which of course was just beyond the pale. I mean, could you imagine if another broadcaster like talkTV, for example, had taken footage of Keir Starmer and spliced two bits together to make it out as if he'd been inciting violence? Imagine what Ofcom would say about that, for example.
And lots of other broadcasters and politicians and all the rest of it. But because it's Donald Trump, and because everyone hates him and thinks he's dreadful and has Trump derangement syndrome, most people at the BBC, I would hasten to add, well, actually, then it's all all right, and then it's okay, and then they can bury the report and not do anything about it.
Exactly. I mean, as Dan Hannan wrote in the Telegraph this week, for the BBC, the words Daily Mail, for example, and the words Donald Trump are simply the punchline to a joke.
Yeah.
You say it, everyone laughs and rolls their eyes. But in the real world, it's much more complicated than that. And for those of us who live outside of the privileged metropolitan, elitist, liberal bubble, things look rather different. And the BBC just can't seem to get it from the outside how this looks. I mean, you've had John Simpson, one of the most senior journalists and broadcasters at the BBC, taking to Twitter now, in the current climate, claiming that the attacks on the BBC are politically motivated.
Nick Robinson has said similar things, yeah.
Yeah, and he is contravening the BBC's impartiality guidelines for social media, even now, right now.
And I've just looked up on my phone what John Simpson has retweeted this. James Landale, the diplomatic correspondent, former deputy political editor, amid all the guff, just this: I am proud to work for BBC News and even prouder to work alongside so many outstanding colleagues. We are not perfect. We must always strive to be better, but in a darkening world, we remain a shaft of light. Oh, sorry, you know, listen, choose the day to say that, James Landale. That is a really, really bad idea to post that today, especially amid all the guff. Hold on a second. Guff, you've been accused and shown to have changed the meaning of what the President of the United States has said. He's suing you for £1 billion. You've got a Director General who's resigned. You've got the CEO of BBC News who has resigned. This isn't guff. This is really serious editorial failings.
Exactly, and the interesting thing is that this is the tone taken by a large chunk of the left-wing media as well. If you read The Guardian, The Observer and others, you'll find that what they're saying is that this is a big conspiracy theory. It's the right-wing press, right-wing media, right-wing politicians all ganging up and enacting a coup on the BBC from the inside as well as the outside. This is deranged, swivel-eyed, unhinged stuff. They believe it, and BBC journalists are echoing those same sentiments, as are politicians on the left. So it's the left all wrapping itself up in a frenzy of conspiracy theory, and the BBC is embroiled in that. It's no longer possible to claim that the BBC is not an organ of the left, I'm afraid. It's supposed to be impartial. It isn't. The licence fee, the whole model of the licence fee, is based upon an impartial broadcaster, the need for an impartial broadcaster. If it's no longer impartial, the reason for the licence fee, I'm afraid, collapses.
Tell us about BBC Arabic as well, because it's had to make 215 corrections and clarifications over the past 2 years on stories found to be biased, inaccurate or misleading. Some of the detail here, I was looking in the report earlier actually about, even on the 7th of October, talking about hostages being brought into, being taken by Hamas terrorists, being brought into Gaza. The BBC main website covered that in quite a number of stories. BBC Arabic didn't mention it.
Yeah, I mean, BBC Arabic has been rampant with Israelophobia for years. I've reported on it myself extensively. When I was editor of the Jewish Chronicle, we ran a campaign about it. The BBC treated it with derision and contempt. And this report has just pulled out a few bullet points which highlight some of the endemic problems at BBC Arabic since October the 7th until the present day. And they include things like: it had very little reporting on Israeli suffering or the hostages. It had very little criticism of Hamas, I'm afraid to say. It devoted huge swathes of its articles to statements regurgitated from Hamas and from Hezbollah, denying factually accurate stories with no basis at all. It described terror attacks as military operations. It published fake news, such as Iranian and Syrian claims that Israel had staged an attack as a precursor to attacking, as a reason to attack Hezbollah. And it gave a platform to journalists who had praised terrorism and glorified terrorism, not just a few times, but hundreds and hundreds of times. And then when it came under pressure from Kemi Badenoch for this, it released a statement downplaying these journalists, calling them eyewitnesses, which they were not. So we see that even to the public, the BBC is lying. This is the public who is funding it through the licence fee. You know, the BBC is supposed to be working with us, with the public, with the country, not against us. And yet it's this sneering attitude that seeks to educate us into liberal, metropolitan, cosmopolitan ways that derides the majority of the public and treats them, I'm afraid, like dirt.
Jake, let's get your thoughts on another story. This is in The Standard. A junior doctor avoiding being struck off after he made social media posts which mocked a Jewish massacre, referred to Jewish people as Jew banker goblins. He described clips denying the Holocaust as pretty convincing. But the General Medical Council says his conduct fell just short of that which would be considered serious enough to pose a risk to public protection. Now, if there are people who hate the phrase, but visibly Jewish, if there are people who wear a Star of David on their neck or wear clothing that identifies them as being Jewish, how confident are they going to be going to this guy for medical treatment to receive the proper treatment that they have? This is absolutely outrageous.
Exactly, and in fact, I would ask all of your viewers, whether Jewish or not Jewish, to ask themselves whether they would be comfortable being treated.
I certainly wouldn't.
By this man. I mean, let's look in detail at what he said, because that's important. So in 2018, after the synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh, in which a neo-Nazi gunned down 11 Jews, innocent Jews, it was the worst killing of Jews in American history at the time, he tweeted, ha ha ha, Sieg Heil, ha ha ha, gas the Jews, ha ha ha, just kidding, but have you seen these YouTube videos about the Holocaust? They're pretty convincing, in my opinion. I mean, that's not particularly funny or comforting to patients, prospective patients of this man. And again, in that same year, he tweeted, me, it's important to represent Judaism and Jewish people fairly and respectfully in art. Also me, Jew banker goblins. I mean, this is not sane stuff. This chap seems to be unhinged, at least from his social media output. And yet the General Medical Council seem to think that he's still fit to treat patients. And of course, for everyone, Jewish or non-Jewish, this is a problem. But for Jews, it's particularly worrying. You know, it's not just in the medical profession as well. It reminds me of the story I heard from a friend the other day. His ex-girlfriend, who's Jewish, was being targeted by anti-Semitic thugs on the London Underground, and she ran away from them to London Underground staff, only to find that they were sporting pro-Palestine badges
for goodness sake.
On their lapels. Yeah. I mean, it feels like a hostile environment for Jews. There's nowhere to turn, and this is just really representative of how the mainstream are beginning to feel as well, with this besiegement of radical Islamists on the one side and radical progressives, not least the BBC, on the other.
Jake, always good to talk to you, especially when such serious issues need to be raised. Jake Wallace-Simons there, author and columnist, author of Never Again, How the West Betrayed the Jews and Itself. That book is out at the moment. Thank you so much to everybody who has been in touch. John in London, he says the BBC needs to contact Farage and ask him to help them smooth things over with President Trump. The situation is very serious. Mick in Wallington says, I've just been speaking to friends in America. They no longer trust the UK as an honest, reliable ally. Dawn in Chelmsford says, we're in a dark place. Our state-funded BBC has been found wanting. Our government is struggling with scandals and ludicrous blunders, particularly in the Justice Department. Oh yes, and big tax rises are also looming. I'll take more of your calls, texts, tweets and voice notes coming up next here on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is talk.
Well, thanks to everybody who has been in touch. Carl has sent us a voice note. You can do this through WhatsApp. You just record your voice note and then send it to 0344 499 1000. This is what Carl has to say.
Let's get this right. This wasn't a mistake. They knew exactly what they were doing. You don't get two clips from two different parts of a speech, 50-odd minutes apart, 54 minutes apart, whatever it was, and merge them together. They knew exactly what they're doing. So can we drop this narrative that it was a mistake? It wasn't a mistake. They've got exactly what they deserved.
A deliberate error. I need to start calling it that from now on, Carl. Thank you for that. Bernie has been in touch in the BBC as well.
Peter, I think it's outrageous for Aqil Ahmed to claim this was a mistake. It cannot be a mistake that you deliberately edit a speech to take out something that gives it clear meaning and give it another meaning. It cannot be a mistake, and he needs to be held accountable. Anybody who's still arguing that these things are mistakes is part of the problem and needs to be removed. And I see no reason why they shouldn't be sued by President Trump.
Susan's been in touch and says, I feel very strongly about this. What the BBC did was wrong, but let's not forget Donald Trump is riddled with legal issues due to years of corruption and extortion. He has also been impeached for his involvement in the insurrection on the Capitol and facing legal prosecution along with other crimes when he leaves office. He is crooked to the core and has no right to be suing people with his long-standing record of corruption, says Susan. Clay in Folkestone in Kent says, Peter, I pay the BBC tax fee, not to watch the BBC, which I detest, because I want to watch live broadcast TV. Like talk, but I'm breaking the law if I don't pay the BBC. There should not be a TV tax, and to anyone who says about that, the World Service being listened to abroad, if they want to listen to it, let them pay for it. Leslie says, I like Graham Stringer when he described the BBC bias on Brexit, trans, etc. He is describing Starmer. Graham should join Reform. And another person says, Ed Davies' Trump derangement syndrome knows no bounds. He is prepared to defend the BBC's disgraceful and deliberate anti-Trump propaganda and election interference. Davy is shameless and should resign. Do you know what, actually? Can I ask the top team behind the glass, headed by Ryan, if you can bring me in Ed Davies' statement and what he said on this, his tweet about this, because I want to say exactly what Ed Davies said, because I read this and just thought it is totally nuts. I'll read it out in a second, but first of all I'm going to take a couple of calls, firstly from Harry, then from Mark. Harry's in Birmingham. Harry, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
I'd just like to say TVS perfectly sums up everything, especially what you said about the caller who sent the message, Susan. Everything she said was pretty much false. I can't wait for the day...
Donald Trump has been in legal trouble.
Well, do you know what the charges are? Because I could literally tell you what they are. There were 34 QuickBook entries that were put as legal expenses, which was a misdemeanor, which New York falsely tried to upgrade as a criminal conviction, and they weren't.
I think Susan's point is, I'm not necessarily arguing against you, Harry. I'm saying that Susan's point essentially was, where is Trump's moral authority on this? Do you think he has moral authority on this?
100%, because previous to him running for president in 2016, had Barack Obama not tried to insult him at a dinner, he wouldn't have ran. So, to be fair, the BBC deserves everything that Donald Trump...
You're happy with him suing them for $1 billion?
He can sue them for however amount he wants. People shouldn't be paying for this TV licence. It's an embarrassment to British television. That corporation, for me personally, it's my opinion only, is dirty and corrupt. Look at what they did with Jimmy Savile. Look at what they've done with Hugh Edwards. And then you get people like Philip Schofield and all these horrible people.
Well, he was ITV rather than BBC.
No, you're right about that. But they get 2-minute sections, a little bit of criticism, but people like Trump, Andrew Tate, Elon Musk, all these people that talk against corruption, they try to make them out to be the bad guys. And the same thing's happening with Trump. The amount of people I've said to tell me one thing you know bad about Trump, they can never name, and they just turn around and say, oh, listen to this guy now, and then they revert to name calling.
Well, one thing I could say badly about Trump is something he said when he talked about grabbing women by the... And he said a word I'm not going to say at 20 to 6. I mean, what do you think about that?
Have you watched the whole interview? You haven't watched the whole clip because...
Okay, well, he did say that.
Do you want me to give you the context?
You can if you want to.
So that was a conversation he was having in a car with somebody, and it wasn't... You have to watch the clip because it's a 5-minute clip, and if I take... For example, if I was to sing along to a hip-hop song and use the N-word, does that mean I'm racist, or does that mean I'm singing...
It's not a nice thing that he said, and a lot of people take issue with that.
Put it into context, and you understand the reference with which he said it. He didn't actually say that.
Well, I mean, he did say it. It was recorded, Harry. He did say it.
How did he end the sentence? Because they let me.
I mean, it's still not a nice thing to say, Harry. I think we could go on all day about this. What do you think needs to happen with the BBC?
Well, the first best things happened is the guys resigned, and so rightfully so. But it's just institutionally, it's not just going to be upper management. They say that a certain thing filters downwards, and it's filtered so far deeply into the BBC. The whole place is a mess.
Harry, I've just been handed the top team behind the glass have given me Ed Davies' letter to the Prime Minister. Can I just read you a little bit of it and get your reaction to it, actually? President Trump's assault on the BBC is a serious threat to our national interest, and I urge you to join me in standing up against it. The BBC belongs to everyone here in the United Kingdom, says Ed Davey, leader of the Lib Dems. We should be incredibly proud that the UK is home to the world's #1 source of trusted news, something that strengthens our democracy while also enhancing our power to uphold our values around the globe. It should be extremely concerning to us to see the President of the United States pressuring the BBC over its leadership and attacking its journalists as corrupt, and his press secretary telling everybody to watch a different news channel. It should not be up to foreign powers to dictate where the British people get their views from. We must stand united to defend our democracy from foreign interference like this, even when it comes from a crucial ally. What do you think of what Ed Davies saying there?
Ed Davey is a politician, and you should ask Ed Davey why it is the Labour MPs felt the need to go to America and help campaign against Trump during his election.
Well, he's a Liberal Democrat, certainly, but he is saying, will you join me in condemning Donald Trump's attack on the BBC? As political leaders, we have a responsibility to protect one of our nation's most trusted institutions from becoming subservient to Donald Trump and his cronies, especially when their values are so far removed from the values of the British people. The BBC belongs to Britain, not Trump. We must defend it together, says Ed Davey.
What we must defend is Britain from corrupt politicians who say what they feel they need to say to keep their own interests alive. The fact is, the BBC goes over to America, tries to interview Trump on a regular basis, and they constantly get caught out. This isn't a once in a 2-3 year event. The BBC gets caught regularly doing this type of reporting. They put out this statement about being non-biased and non-partisan and whatever. That's totally false. You can say the words but live by them. And we know for a fact the BBC do not do that. And this attack on 60 Minutes did the same. They tried to edit a speech to try and make Kamala Harris sound even more intelligent. He sued 60 Minutes. He won. He'll sue the BBC and he'll win, because the fact is he's suing people when he's right, and people don't like it because he's Trump. Previous to him running for president, everyone loved him. Apprentice was #1 show. He was in hip-hop videos, he was in TV shows, he was in movies. Runs for president, all of a sudden the left-wing parties go nuts.
Okay, Harry, good to talk to you. Thanks for your call. We don't agree on everything. That's okay, because we disagree without being disagreeable on my shows. Mark is in Lincolnshire and has some thoughts on this too. Mark, I wonder if you're listening to what I was saying there about Ed Davey and his views on this. Maybe I could ask you your views when he says, will you join me, asking Keir Starmer, in condemning Donald Trump's attack on the BBC? Sure, it was the BBC that attacked him. As political leaders, we have a responsibility to protect one of our nation's most treasured institutions from becoming subservient to Donald Trump and his cronies, especially when their values are so far removed from the values of the British people. The BBC belongs to Britain, not Trump. We must defend it together. Yours sincerely, Ed Davey, leader of the Liberal Democrats.
Hi, Peter. Hi. Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, Ed Davey, I mean, is there not a body of water you can go frolicking in? I mean, just sod off, you know. Who cares what Ed Davey thinks? I mean, this whole thing, the BBC thing, I mean, my point on all of this really is it will continue to happen, because the reality is, like, the one that's gone, Deborah, whatever her name
Deborah Furness, yeah.
Deborah Furness. There's no, what was it she said? No institutional
cultural bias, yeah.
Yeah. Well, she thinks that. I understand why she thinks that. She genuinely will believe that.
Yeah.
Because these people genuinely also believe that they are morally superior, that everybody thinks the same way that they do, because they have no real contact.
And if they don't, they're bad people.
Yeah, they will assume that people that don't agree with them are a tiny, tiny, tiny minority that are fringe, that are far right, that are probably Nazis, whatever, because this is the worldview that these people kind of have now. And, you know, so I can understand the cognitive attitude that these people have, because as I say, it's the way they view the world.
Well, it's really interesting you mentioned that, actually, and I just want to play a clip of Deborah Turness previously talking about the Hamas issue. Now, she neglects to mention in this, I think this is the right clip that I'm thinking of, that Hamas are prescribed as a terror organisation, both as a political body and as a paramilitary terrorist body. Let's just remind ourselves of what Deborah Turness said to the BBC staff about Hamas earlier this year.
I think it's really important that we are clear that Abdullah's father was a Deputy Agriculture Minister and therefore, was a member of the Hamas-run government, which is different to being part of the military wing of Hamas. And I think externally, it's often simplified that he was in Hamas, and I think it's an important point of detail that we need to continually remind people of the difference and of that connection.
Yeah, I'm sure he's a lovely guy, and really the fact that there's a documentary about Gaza which was narrated by the son of a terrorist is fine, because there's a bit of context to it. Mark, just your reaction to that.
Just what I've been saying, really, Peter. I mean, they genuinely believe that is the case, that they can draw a distinction. They don't really see Hamas as terrorists, do they, at the end of the day?
No, they don't, and they certainly don't mention it on air either, when it's blindingly obvious to all of us. Mark, listen, thanks for your call. We're going to talk about the sport next, but we will continue the discussion with viewers and listeners at home, so get your call in 0344 499 1000. Stay with us.
Big news coming this December. Our talkTV app is moving to the Talk app. You can watch, catch up and listen to all your favourite shows and podcasts anytime, anywhere, all on the Talk app. From Monday, 1st of December, the talkTV app will no longer exist, so don't miss out. So head over to your App Store or Google Play and search Talk now. Big news coming this December. Our talkTV app is moving to the Talk app. You can watch, catch
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
Thank you to Timothy in Barnsley, who says, great show as usual, thank you. You only have to listen to Deborah Turness's answer regarding the BBC's bias. She replied with so much contempt when asked this question. I think they have no respect regarding what the public thinks of the corporation's image, says Timothy. Tony in Cheam says, Davey is so out of his depth he'll probably get a job in government. And Dan and Kent says, stop the BBC bashing Cardi P. It's not just the BBC who are woke invested, it's all the mainstream media. People need to calm down and stop getting triggered. Well, what do you think about that? 0344 499 1000. We are going to calm down. We're going to have a little island of calm. The island of calm is called Mike Anstead, and he's going to be here in just a second with the sport.
Sports news from the Sun.
That's the first time you've been called an island of calm, isn't it, Mike?
First and last time, I think. So, yeah, I'll take it.
Mike is the sport head of content at The Sun. Tell us about Liverpool having a goal disallowed. This was the showpiece match of the Premier League over the weekend. Tell us about this.
So Liverpool aren't happy. Yeah, they're demanding answers from Howard Webb, who's in charge of all the refs in the Premier League, obviously in charge of VAR as well. So Andy Robertson was deemed offside, interfering when Virgil van Dijk nodded home what they were hoping was a chance to get back into this game against Manchester City. The referee, Chris Kavanagh, deemed that he was offside, even though he ducked, and some Liverpool fans are pointing out that actually it wasn't in the way of Donnarumma's sort of eye line. Referee didn't agree with that. The VAR also thought it was not enough of a decision that he would have to intervene on. So Liverpool claiming actually it's subjective. You should have gone to it and should have asked the referee to review it, and possibly could have gone to the screen and said, actually, I was wrong. They're happy with that. So Liverpool aren't happy. Refs chief standing by the decision. We're absolutely fine. End of the day, Liverpool lost 3-0, and they need to probably improve their form as the main priority, I think.
What about the team that beat them, Manchester City? Are they the only team who could potentially catch Arsenal for the title?
Well, it's looking that way. City look pretty good at the moment. I mean, they had a slow start to the season, but they absolutely smashed Liverpool yesterday. And Jeremy Doku, who's one of their star men at the moment, he's the absolute rip-roaring Belgian winger, very, very, very quick. He's saying that when we're playing like this, no one can stand next to us, and I think he's got a good point. Arsenal, who dropped a couple of points up at Sunderland, definitely looking in the rear-view mirror now, worried that City are coming up behind them fast.
Tell us more positive news at Aston Villa. Their star England international signed a new contract with the club. Tell us about this.
Yeah, so Morgan Rogers back with England squad again this week, so he's got a new deal. He's on about 150 grand a week, which I think is similar to your salary here, Peter. I think
it is, yeah. It's actually a day.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Grand a day. I didn't want to talk about that live on air, obviously.
Did you say, sorry, £1.50 a day? Sorry, I misheard you.
A couple of noughts between us, that's fine. But no, he's basically signed his contract. He was wanted by Chelsea and a lot of other big guns. But what's interesting is he's bigged up his manager Unai Emery, which I think is important because Morgan Rogers was signed from a championship team, Middlesbrough, really done well to sort of get all the way from where he is to one of the best players in the Premier League and one of the better players for England. And he's talking about thanking Emery for how much he helped him. Emery jokingly used to call him a championship player in training to sort of wind him up motivation to prove that you can go on and become a Prem star. And look, good on him. He's earned his money. He's a Villa superstar.
Mike, thank you. An island of calm, absolutely. Mike Anstead there, sport head of content at The Sun. Appreciate you joining us in the studio. We're going to continue this debate on the BBC, and I just want to remind ourselves of what Nigel Farage said earlier on this. He was speaking to Jeremy this morning on our breakfast programme. This is Nigel Farage, the leader of Reform UK.
Going to defund the BBC from its current model, be in no doubt about that. The BBC, under our plans, would be slimmed down to something very relatively small, but most of it would move to a subscription model to compete in the open market. Do I want it to have a basic role for news and current affairs? Yes, but it's going to have to be very, very different to the way it is now.
Leslie's been in touch and says it'll be interesting to see Starmer's response on Trump after his debacle recognising a Palestinian state. Will he now support the Jewish community? John in Sussex says, wouldn't it be appropriate if Trump wins a substantial amount of compensation from the BBC that he donates it to Reform UK? Let's speak to Chris in Manchester. He's given me a ring, 0344 499 1000. Just a couple of minutes before the news, Chris, but let's hear your views. You're very welcome to the programme.
Yeah, good to speak to you again, Peter. I just think it's about time that we got rid of this ridiculous perception of political impartiality when it comes to broadcasters. Everybody knows that the BBC are left of centre, as are Channel 4, as are Sky. Everybody knows that Talk and GB News are perhaps more to the right Why don't we just get rid of this?
Is there any news source that you get where you just say, actually, this is just straight up and down, this is just the facts, this is not, I mean, we're an opinion station, I'm totally open about that, of course, but is there anybody you think, actually, if I just want to see exactly what has happened, that I trust?
Not really.
Right.
I'm not saying I don't trust them. I trust them, but in terms of the partial, whether it's implied or deliberate partiality. At the end of the day, Peter, I know you've. I don't know your political views, but I know you've worked for the Conservative Party.
Yeah.
It's probably, and I don't expect you to say, it's probably reasonable to suppose that you're perhaps more supportive of right-wing politics. Similarly with your colleagues over at GB News, they appear to sort of tend towards...
I think that's fair enough, and the thing is we're kind of open about it. I mean, we have a range of views on the station, and we have, we take due impartiality and Ofcom obviously very seriously, but of course many of our viewers and listeners and many of our presenters have clear views. We're asked to have our opinion. Would you like to see that on the BBC if you didn't have to pay the licence fee? Would that be okay?
Absolutely, yeah. At the end of the day, let's see your cards on the table. It's an open secret that they are to the left of centre. So why don't they just own up? I mean, I appreciate there's an issue because they're a publicly funded broadcaster and should remain impartial, but that makes the situation even more ridiculous.
Yeah.
Simple solution is allow people to continue to pay the licence fee if they want to. If people don't want to, they don't have to, and have some kind of subscription or service or advertising to pay to make up the shortfall, which there would be. I'm sure there will be people who would be quite happy to carry on.
Yeah, well, there's certain things, I don't know about you, Chris, there's certain things I'd certainly be happy to pay for on the BBC, like the Traders. If they charge me £1 every time I watch the Traders, that would be preferable to having a licence fee, because I think it's a really good show and I really enjoy it, and it's nothing to do with politics whatsoever. Chris, thank you. That's Chris in Manchester there. Lots more opinions coming your way. We'll continue to debate all of this. Michael Crick, former BBC political editor, is coming. News Now Political.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
just gone 6 o'clock. I'm Peter Cardwell. This is Talk Drive. Thank you so much for your company. The BBC in crisis as the President of the United States threatens to sue it for $1 billion. We'll talk about that right throughout the programme between now and 7 o'clock when Kevin O'Sullivan takes over. We'll also talk about what's in the Sun tomorrow. We'll talk as well about Calamity Lammy, a probe finding guards accused of criminal offences allowed to quietly resign from their posts as prison officers or transfer to avoid police probes. There are serious problems in our prison system. We'll talk about that. The BBC is the main thing you want to talk about today, and I'll make sure that as many people get on air between now and 7 o'clock. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call to get your voice on the air. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV. Follow me at Peter Cardwell. You can send me a voice note, less than a minute please. We'll play those out. You can also send me a WhatsApp text message or give me a ring, all on the main number 0344 499 1000. Plenty to discuss between now and 7 o'clock here on Talk Drive. Well, loads of reaction, including from Vincent in North Yorkshire. He says, Peter, do you think Starmer will give Nigel Farage a call and ask him to speak to his friend President Trump to smooth things over? Can you see it? Mistakes are made, and that's why they put rubber on pencils. This was a deliberate attempt to undermine President Trump. Anyone with a brain can see that. Keep keeping us sane, says Vincent in North Yorkshire. Well, thank you for that. I'm actually going to ask Michael Crick, who is Nigel Farage's biographer, wrote a brilliant book about him. I'm going to ask him in a second. Michael's a former BBC broadcaster himself. But before that, I just want to take a look at what the outgoing chief executive of BBC News, Deborah Turness, said about whether or not the broadcaster is biased in her view.
I would like to say it has been the privilege of my career to serve as the CEO of BBC News and to work with our brilliant team of journalists. I stepped down over the weekend because the buck stops with me. But I'd like to make one thing very clear. BBC News is not institutionally biased. That's why it's the world's most trusted news provider. Of course our journalists aren't corrupt. Our journalists are hard-working people who strive for impartiality, and I will stand by their journalism.
Is there institutional bias at the BBC?
There is no institutional bias. Mistakes are made, but there's no institutional bias.
But why weren't the mistakes dealt with on Trump, on anti-Semitism, on women's rights?
I'm sure that story will emerge.
Very interesting from Deborah Turness there. I wonder what you think about that. 0344 499 1000. Well, earlier today, the leader of Reform UK, Nigel Farage, spoke to Jeremy this morning on the breakfast programme about the BBC. This is what he said.
I'm going to defund the BBC from its current model, be in no doubt about that. The BBC, under our plans, would be slimmed down to something very relatively small, but most of it would move to a subscription model to compete in the open market. You know, do I want it to have a basic role for news and current affairs? Yes, but it's going to have to be very, very different to the way it is now.
Well, I was actually on the BBC News Channel last night. They gave me a ring and I gave my opinion on it to the BBC's audience of their news channel. This is what I said. There's a cultural problem, unlike what Deborah Turness said. Deborah Turness and Tim Davie, two incredibly important people until today in the BBC, but the problem is the culture of the BBC. And I must say that I worked for BBC News, I worked for Newsnight, I worked for Question Time, I've worked in BBC Northern Ireland for the cumulative total of about 3 years. I have many friends and colleagues, many who did an incredibly good job, and I'm sure there are still very many people, I know there are many people at the BBC who do great work and take impartiality very, very seriously. The problem is that we pay the licence fee for the BBC to be impartial. It hasn't been impartial recently on a number of issues, and it wasn't Deborah Turness or Tim Davie who doctored the clip of Donald Trump so that it didn't tell the truth. It wasn't Deborah Turness or Tim Davie who had put the trans guidance out, for example, or sanctioned Martine Croxall. It wasn't Tim Davie or Deborah Turness who decided that certain things should go on the BBC Verify website that were then taken down for being wrong. There are major, major problems here. I wouldn't have dreamt of doing an edit like they did on Donald Trump, for example. That wouldn't have entered my head when I was a BBC employee. It wouldn't enter my head now as a journalist still. And I think that clearly there are many problems right throughout this. Also with the Gaza documentary, why is the executive producer of that not being held to account? Why have people not been forced to resign or sacked as a result of that? There's much more to this. Yes, well done for Deborah Turness for falling on her sword. She should have done that a long time ago, as should Tim Davie. But there are many other people that need to be held to account for this. And if things don't change properly, if the culture doesn't change, and if the BBC doesn't get back to those Reithian values of doing the right thing, of acting impartially for for the licence fee we pay them, well then its future as an organisation, particularly as a news organisation, is in doubt when we see the last 3 Directors General having to resign because of serious editorial failings. That was me speaking to the BBC News Channel last night when they had me on. I want to speak now to Michael Crick, former BBC political editor of Newsnight. We worked together on Newsnight, and Michael, I can honestly say that I hadn't a clue at that stage, certainly, and I still don't really, what your political views actually are. You acted with complete impartiality when you were political editor of Newsnight. How has the BBC got itself into such a crisis, and what does it do now, do you think?
Well, I was going to say, don't worry, I'm not sure what my political views are myself. I'm a sort of centrist, really, slightly left of centre, but some things would be regarded as pretty right-wing and some things pretty left-wing. But how has it got itself into this? Well, I agree with you, actually. I don't agree with everything you've said, the clip you've said, but I do agree that the culture is a problem. And actually, it doesn't just affect the BBC, it affects Channel 4 News, where I, as you know, and you and I have discussed this privately, I was very unhappy about what I saw as left-wing bias, pro-Remain bias over a number of years on that programme. And I think a lot of this stems from the type of people that go into broadcasting. They're nearly universally university graduates from middle-class backgrounds, predominantly from southern England, and from the sort of the metropolitan areas, the metropolitan elite. You don't get many people from Barrow or Hartlepool or Northern Ireland, actually, and they have a certain outlook on issues that in those areas, at those parts of the country, the views are very different, and we saw that with the astonishment with which parts of the BBC and parts of Channel 4 News reacted when the country voted for Brexit in 2016. And I think, for a number of years before then in the BBC and probably other outlets as well, and this may affect ITV too, I don't watch enough of the ITV news these days, that the certain issues like our membership of the European Union, like immigration, for a long time were not dealt with, not given the prominence they should have been, and which they're now getting. And for instance, the BBC was very slow, and indeed a lot of other broadcasters were very slow in the period, when was it, roughly 2021, 2022, when migrants started crossing the channel in small boats.
Does that extend?
It was Nigel Farage, actually, who was broadcasting mostly on that issue at that time. Yeah.
And it took a lot of politicians to catch up to that as well. When Deborah Turness, the outgoing chief executive, says that it is not institutionally biased, do you think that's true in relation to Donald Trump, or is that just a fiction?
Well, I am, on that particular incident, and by the way, I think it's incredibly dangerous to have a billionaire president of the United States going around bullying media organizations, and there's a deep suspicion that he did the same thing in HarperCollins, the publisher, where the UK chief executive, Charlie Redmayne, resigned a few weeks ago after.
Okay, I just don't know about that. I just don't know about that, Michael. But let's stick to Trump himself and the BBC.
Sure you would agree with me that for the president of the United States to go around threatening, no other president would ever have done this, no matter how rich they were. And of course, he's probably the richest president in the United States.
Is he not right to feel aggrieved, though, if the BBC have doctored that clip?
Of course he's right to feel aggrieved. And of course, the editing of that clip was wrong, from what I've seen. But he should not be threatening the BBC with a £1 billion lawsuit. And it would be fascinating to find out, if we ever do, whether those threats were made yesterday and that then led to the resignation.
So what should Trump do? How should Trump properly complain about the BBC?
Like any other reasonable leader, and say, I don't like this. But world leaders should not be going around launching or threatening £1 billion lawsuits, which it would bankrupt the BBC pretty much if that was to actually happen. And he bullies far too much. But anyway, we're not really on in this discussion here to talk about Trump. I've strayed too far from the main subject. So I'll let you get back onto your next question.
Yeah, no, indeed. Well, as someone who's written a biography of Nigel Farage, he knows how he operates. How do you think? What do you make of his comments?
He's a bully as well, by the way.
Well, I'm sure he would deny that. What would you make of his reaction to this and what he sees as the future of the BBC, Michael?
Well, I mean, there have been. In fact, I think at one point, Farage and his party were talking about closing down the BBC, but I'd have to go and check that. So actually, there seemed to be a certain element of rowing back on that, on what Farage said. I mean, and indeed, there is a sort of statement of the obvious in it that I don't think the BBC can survive on the license. The license fee itself can survive probably not much longer than another 10 years.
Okay.
And desperately in the BBC and government, they're trying to think of alternatives. I mean, Lisa Nandy's already said a few months ago, it's almost become a voluntary thing.
Yeah. Well, there are
incident won't help.
Yeah, and there are lots of people who now don't pay their licence fee and don't want the BBC. Michael Crick, thank you. That's Michael Crick there, former political editor of Newsnight, former political correspondent Channel 4 News, biographer of Nigel Farage as well. I want to speak now to Dave Mason, who's a crisis consultant with Mentor Media Training. Dave, what advice would you give the BBC? Dave, are you there? You got me?
Yes, it just suddenly disappeared as you mentioned my name.
Okay. Well, I think we've got you now. What advice would you give the BBC?
I think there are three things that jump out of this for me, and it was very interesting listening to Michael Crick talking there. Three words jump out for me: culture, bullying in a number of senses of that word, and also corporate crisis communication, which the BBC seems ill-equipped to handle, going back as far as 2007, when they rather inappropriately clipped up the Queen again for a TV show where they implied that she was storming out of a photo shoot with Annie Leibovitz, and of course she wasn't. And through the years, I've worked at the BBC the same as you have. I've sat in edit suites overnight, agonising over an editor trying to tell me to make something that I wanted to be 2 minutes long, and they wanted to make it 1 minute long.
Yeah.
And when you do that job and you're under that enormous pressure, mistakes can happen, and you can take a clip out of something and you can put two.
But this was more than a mistake. This wasn't just this changed the meaning of it. You and I have not, I would imagine, I don't know you, Dave, but I would be very surprised if either of us has ever said that clip, as we see it now, does not in any way represent actually what was said.
No, but what you do have sometimes when you put two pieces together that maybe in this case I understand were 4 minutes apart.
It was much more than 4 minutes. It was about 40 minutes.
There are mechanisms where you can use a fade to black, or you can use a graphic.
We do it on this station, Louis, called a white flash. You get a little flash, and you know that they're two separate bits.
Shows the passage of time, and I think that's important. So it's good for people to hear that there are technicalities and things that you can do here. Whether it's not for me to say whether there was bias or not in this case that was anything more than unconscious. Come
on, it's pretty conscious when you change the meaning of something. That's conscious.
Can I finish my point?
You can, but it's conscious.
No, those are your words, not mine. The point is, I favour cock-up rather than conspiracy over the years. The problem we have with the BBC, going back to my point about culture, is they are gripped by, I think, issues where there was concern over bullying, both from senior managers and also from talent that had bullied junior staff, and that there was this imbalance that we've seen in broadcasting over the years between the talent and the production staff. And so I think there's a potential, and this is my perspective, that might have swung the other way. And when junior staff make mistakes or make errors, it's not challenged. And people who are making repeated mistakes, you probably remember being a junior journalist or reporter and being pulled up on things time and time again.
Of course.
I wouldn't mind betting that the culture is that people who are making these kinds of errors aren't being taken to one side.
But then what's the point of management, Dave, when you say, you know, you've got so many...
made about BBC management over the years.
You've got far more managers in the BBC than any other media organisation I've ever worked for.
And ineffective ones in lots of cases, and I worked there and I saw this. So the thing that concerns me is that, yes, there is a cultural problem over the way their governance and editorial management of mistakes that keep happening. Because why do we keep having mistakes? We've had mistakes in Strictly. It's not just news. Let's just broaden this out. It's a broad church. There are cock-ups being made editorially across Strictly or various other programs. You know, Greg Wallace. That wasn't a political bias thing. This is imbalance.
But Greg Wallace, I would argue,
leading to junior staff either feeling disempowered or not being guided properly by management.
And I totally agree with that. And the Greg Wallace allegations...
That's a fair comment?
It's a perfectly fair comment. And the Greg Wallace allegations, if I could actually add to your case on this, is that those allegations about that presenter went on for more than 15 years. So there's not just a failure of Greg Wallace, there's a failure of management. And when you get a bit presentery, and yes, I've done it behind the scenes, and I've been told off by management, not very often, but occasionally.
Presentery.
When you get presentery, when you say things that you shouldn't say, but you know you can just about get away with it because you're a presenter. It's happened to me. I've been on the receiving end of it. I've given it out and I've been told off about it. There was one occasion when a manager rang me for 48 seconds the next day, and I knew by the end of it I had been told, I had been admonished. There's another word I would use, but probably not at 6:20 in the evening. And the fact is that I didn't do anything like that again. The fact is that the management failures and the fact that these things can happen, particularly in regard to presenter behaviour with Greg Wallace, for example, that's not just a failure of Greg Wallace, that's a failure of management too.
Yeah, I thought we would disagree. I absolutely agree with you that the failure of management goes beyond news and it's systemic across an organisation. And lots of people have been saying there's a cultural issue at the BBC, but what I wanted to come on and suggest to you that this is what's at the heart of it. It's not correct management of staff who are making repeated mistakes, and that just lots of separate episodes of things being badly edited or put together does not add up to one great big conspiracy theory of an organisation acting as one organ to be, to be extremely biased. I just don't believe it. One person described the BBC, I remember this not long ago, it was very good, that the BBC editorial structure is 250 BBCs because you've got editors with the license to make their own editorial decisions about what they lead on, what stories they follow, all over the world.
Although, well, I can see where you're coming from. Okay, Dave, I can see where you're coming from.
There is not one BBC acting as an organ. But I do take the point about unconscious bias, and I think what you were discussing with Michael Crick before.
But the problem is, Dave, just let me ask one more. Dave, just let me ask one more question. The problem is that there is clearly unconscious bias. There's unconscious bias everywhere. There's deliberate bias everywhere as well. But the problem is as well that Michael Prescott, his report, if you read it, as I expect you have or will, is 19 pages of repeated errors that show bias in lots of different areas. And clearly, I'm not saying every single person at the BBC is biased. I'm not saying every single one of them is a left-wing tree hugger who hates Donald Trump. I'm not saying that for a second. I know lots of people who work for the BBC. I've worked for it myself. It's not an entirely flawed organisation. It does many, many good things.
I make one point about the expertise that I've come on here to really discuss, and that is the vacuum that BBC management leave when they don't communicate. Now, they could have apologised for this last week and they left a vacuum. They could have done it in May and they left a vacuum. And the board failed to sign off on a statement which is exactly the vacuum that creates organisational crisis. And this is...
But just finally, Dave,
I've got to say this because it's so important. It could have saved the BBC all the crises they've had in the last few years with Wallace or Strictly last Christmas, with the Go Compare chap, all the rest of it. They could have saved this by nipping it in the bud with very early crisis communication. Intervention.
But do you accept, just finally, Dave, do you accept that there has been deliberate bias, as Michael Prescott has pointed out?
No, I'm not. I'm not accepting that.
Okay. Thank you for that. Okay, Dave. Yeah. Thank you. That's Dave Mason there. He's a crisis consultant at Mentor Media Training. I think he's wrong on the final point, but he certainly had his say. Lots to discuss on all of this. 0344 499 1000 to get your point across. Stay with us because we're going to talk about another prison scandal for Calamity Lamy. Stay with us here on Talk Drive.
And listen.
The job of the BBC is to present facts.
Yes, but it's difficult, isn't it, when people don't want to face those facts?
No, it's not difficult.
The BBC's job is to say, there are facts over here which aren't so convenient for you. It's got a highest trust recognition of any media organisation.
People don't realise they're being lied to. Their climate coverage is so unscientific and unfact-based, it's a joke. Their pushing of transgender over women's rights, completely unscientific, unmedically proven and dangerous, I would say. Their coverage of Gaza has been, immoral.
Big news coming this December. Our talkTV app is moving to the Talk app. You can watch, catch up and listen to all your favourite shows and podcasts anytime, anywhere, all on the Talk app. From Monday, 1st of December, the talkTV app will no longer exist, so don't miss out. So head over to your App Store or Google Play and search Talk now.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Thanks to Bob in Surrey, who says the mistake was supervisors did not spot what editors did. Unless they watch both versions, you can understand the producers need to be sacked, contractors are sued, senior heads rule because they cover up and defend. More heads must rule at the BBC, says Bob in Surrey on Twitter. Don says it's a quirk of our electoral system that Ed Davey has so many MPs. He appeared to have no policies except hatred of Trump. I once had a radio debate with Davey. It didn't go very well. Hopefully for him rather than you, Don. Jane says you need to do a segment on Ed Davey. He has plenty to say on Farage, Trump, Musk and others. But what has he said on the post office scandal as he was post office minister? Ed in Sheffield says the idea what the BBC did with Trump's footage was a mistake is rubbish. What proves it wasn't just a random edit is the mood music that was supposed to make it sound sinister and evil. It's an editorial device used to evolve involve a specific emotion and wasn't very intentional. I think you perhaps mean evoke a specific emotion. That is Ed in Sheffield there. Let's talk about a politician under pressure. This is Calamity Lammy, David Lammy, Deputy Prime Minister and Justice Secretary. Prison staff accused of criminal offences at work are being allowed to quietly resign or transfer to avoid police probes. There were certainly many allegations of this in quite a few of the papers, including the Sunday Times. Gabriel Pogren did some really good reporting about it. The shocking findings come amid the prison service crisis following a series of wrongful releases, where I think there are still 3 people at large. HMP Feltham failed to report officers accused of violence, destroying evidence of crimes and inappropriate relationships with inmates. Feltham source told the Daily Mail the management covered up episodes allegedly of serious misconduct to avoid adverse publicity for the prison once it was placed in special measures. 2 officers accused of beating up a young offender then destroyed the body-worn camera which captured the assault. They resigned days before the misconduct hearing and never faced police questioning. Vanessa Freck is with us, Justice Advisor to Reform UK and a former prison governor herself, author of a book called The Governor, which must be said in that voice. Vanessa, great to have you on the programme. What do you make of these very serious allegations?
Well, it just seems that the whole of the public sector is on about cover-ups at the moment, doesn't it?
Fair point.
Look, Feltham has always had a checkered past, always, going back to 2000, the murder of Zahid Mubarak in his cell by his cellmate. And Feltham A in particular is a den of violence. Look, I think whatever has happened is absolutely out of order. If a member of staff is suspected of corruption in any shape or form, whether that's bringing stuff in or inappropriate relations, they should be suspended and a full investigation taken place.
Should Feltham be closed, Vanessa?
Sorry, say again?
Should Feltham be closed, do you think? It's been...
Well, Ian Aitchison reckons that, doesn't he? Look, Feltham has never, ever come out of that dark place. It's got a range of prisoners in Feltham A from 15 to 18 and then from Feltham B from 18 to 30. The range is too great. The mixtures just do not work. And, certainly management should take full responsibility for covering up any wrongdoing by staff. That should be fully investigated. I understand prisons are under extreme pressure and nobody wants bad press, but covering up is, to me, even worse.
There are so many serious allegations. A prison officer allegedly kicking one of the jail's chickens to death. The jail's second most senior governor making sexual remarks about a female officer but was not sacked. A prison officer caught allegedly bringing in drugs and phones for an offender to run a prison shop after the prisoner was hospitalised by other offenders who stole the goods. A female prison officer allegedly having an affair with a murderer she met at Feltham, then continued to visit when he was transferred to another prison, to Belmarsh. And one prison officer jailed for a historic rape and another for possession of indecent images of children. There are so many very, very serious allegations here, and the question, I think, fundamentally goes back to your first answer there, which hit the nail on the head. It cover up in public institutions, and a big question of trust as well, Vanessa. Trust in our prisons, trust in our broadcasters.
Completely. How can we expect the public to trust any of our national institutions? Well, you can't, can you? I mean, I'm sure if you took a poll of your viewers, you would see that nobody trusts the prison service to hold prisoners, or probably trusts staff that they're not corrupt in some form or another. Nobody trusts the BBC not to be biased. You know, the list is endless, or even go to the police and two-tier justice. So, you know, it's just a minefield, complete minefield. But I absolutely think that governors should, none of this, let's swipe it under the carpet. You've got to be open and honest and transparent. Otherwise, you lose public trust, and in losing public trust, you are creating even more of a problem.
Vanessa, thank you. That's Vanessa Freck there, Justice Advisor to Reform UK and a former prison governor herself. We'll find out how The Sun is covering all these stories. The Beebs billion-dollar bungle. There's a story on Madeleine McCann's prime suspect as well. Quite a number of stories they're covering tomorrow. We'll talk to Tom Seward, who is the assistant news editor at The Sun. We'll talk to him in just a second. Keep your comments coming in. Plenty of time for calls and voice notes between now and 7 o'clock. 0344 499 1000. Stay with us.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Hi Peter, Tony from Stratford-upon-Avon here. Hi Tony, thanks for your message. Ed Davey always sides with the establishment and institutions and places them above ordinary people. In Tony's opinion, he's doing it with the BBC, just like he sided with the Post Office by refusing to meet Post Office managers suffering injustice. Paul in Manchester says the BBC will never change, Peter. If you had a bad tooth and have a filling, as soon as the filling falls out, you still have a bad tooth. It needs to be extracted. Good show, says Paul. And Bob says Ed Davey knows how out of touch he is with a statement like that. The BBC has a biased reporting stance and needs to be taken into account. This is another warning shot to the Labour government. It was interesting listening to what Ed Davey had to say earlier. Pretty astonishing comments there, talking about attacks by Donald Trump on the BBC. People may believe that, but I mean, they started it. Anyway, we'll find out how The Sun is covering this. Tom Seward is the assistant news editor. Good to see you in the studio. How are you doing, Tom?
I'm very well, thank you, Peter.
Another big day for the BBC. No doubt you'll be reporting this in tomorrow's paper.
Exactly, big story for us in tomorrow's paper. I mean, just astonishing lawsuit threat by Donald Trump, $1 billion, which I think works out about 4.5 million licence fees.
Right,
like
okay.
That. So just think how big an impact that might have. I mean, you know, we're going pretty hard on it in tomorrow's paper, as you'd expect, an awful lot of coverage. I mean, you know, it's just been scandal after scandal, really, for Tim Davey, hasn't it? I don't know if any of your watchers or viewers or listeners sort of saw our coverage today, but, you know, just a series of front pages.
Yep.
Just really kind of charts his time at the Beeb. I think.
Well, when Tim Davey says there have been a few mistakes, you've got, what is it, 8 different front pages there that you can see there, Hugh Edwards and various very other, and of course they came out fighting on so many of them, including the Sun's coverage of Hugh Edwards.
Precisely, and I think, you know, it's just sort of stood the test of time, really, our reporting. We've turned out
won many awards
to
as
be
well.
right. I think, you know, the point that we might make in tomorrow's paper, you know, they're saying they're not institutionally biased, but if that's the case, you know, why did they both go?
Well, that's a very good point, and they haven't actually explained why they've gone, really.
Precisely.
And Tim Davies tries to say, it's been a tough year and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
Let's hear about Christian Bruckner now. This is the prime suspect in the Madeleine McCann disappearance. What are you reporting about him?
So a big day in court today. So German courts have said that he no longer needs to live in Germany, and so this really kind of raises the question: where is he going to go? There have been suggestions that he might go off to Spain. I think the one place he probably won't go is Portugal, where, as I understand it, he remains a suspect for the Portuguese police. So he could face arrest, but our reporter Rob Pattinson's out in Germany at the moment and has a big exclusive in tomorrow's paper about what he's been doing, where he's been living since he was kicked out of his various different hostels. A big story that I'm sure your viewers will want to have a look at tomorrow morning.
Yeah, no doubt you'll be reporting on the other big court story today about the ex-BBC Radio 1 former Capital Extra DJ Tim Westwood appeared in court for his first hearing after being charged with 4 counts of rape last month as well. He was granted bail at a hearing at Westminster Magistrates Court on Monday. It takes such time and effort to bring those charges, and of course he will protest his innocence as that goes on. Another big court story that occurred after some great work by the Crown Prosecution Service. We'll see what happens there. He of course maintains his innocence. A learner driver passing theory test in the 75th attempt. You're too young to remember Maureen from driving school.
I'm a bit too young for that, I'm afraid. And I passed my theory test on the first time. I'm not sure about you.
Teacher's pet over there.
I really
what about your practical test?
First time again. In fact, it was a condition of me getting my first job in a local paper.
Right.
The editor said, you have to pass this.
Was this a Swindon advertiser?
It was.
It was, right,
okay. Back in the day. So there was a lot riding on it, but 75 attempts at a theory test. My other favourite stat from this, so these are figures that were obtained by the AA. One would-be learner driver tried his or her theory test 128 times and still couldn't manage to pass it. Spent almost £3,000.
That's incredible.
It reminds me of my favourite learner driver story. It's my brother's, who I think failed his practical maybe 6 times. Eventually managed to pass it with the army. On a base that will remain nameless, during which his instructor literally leaned out the window, shouted at one of his mates and still passed him, so just goes to show.
What, leant under the window and shouted at one of
his mates?
How you doing?
Hello.
So the best one I ever heard was a taxi driver in Belfast. He had no reason to lie to me. I brought up, we're talking about driving tests, I think my friend was taking driving tests or something, or I think he said, I think it was in the middle of the day, and he said, do you not drive? And I said, well, I do, but I'm just taking a taxi today, wherever it was. He said on his driving test that the examiner, very sadly, had a heart attack.
Oh my goodness.
So he drove to the hospital, nothing could be done, and then the police interviewed him, and there was a sergeant and a constable, and the young constable said, so you were technically driving without a qualified driver with you, and the sergeant said, like, I think we'll probably just leave this one. I think he did the right thing. Anyway, a couple of days later, they said, right, we'll obviously continue your test. They took him to the exact spot where the previous instructor or examiner had died, exactly with the same clipboard, because he'd done like a third of the test or whatever.
Oh wow!
And then he continued the test. Obviously, he passed.
Yeah,
I mean,
you weren't going to
fail on that one.
Can you?
But it was just the most extraordinary story. I just found that very, very odd.
Turns out my brother is actually now a paramedic. So from having failed his test so many times, he then went on and did blue light training. Is now an absolutely brilliant driver. Would trust him with my life.
Goodness me. It must be also good for your family to have someone doing something useful.
I mean, for family reasons, coming up to Christmas, I have to put all of that in. Otherwise, I will be in trouble.
Yes, indeed. Tell us about cheese.
So I love this story. This is a brilliant little story from one of my colleagues, Eleanor Gunn. So it turns out that we are paying more for Baby Bells in this country than the French, which I'm sure all of your viewers and listeners will agree is absolutely outrageous.
Of course.
So it's £2.45 for a pack of 6 here. And
these are little cheese in the red wax.
Like the tiny little Edams, the little red Edams.
Like them,
everybody will have seen them.
Yeah.
The French are paying 35 pence less, £2.10 they pay, which may be fair enough given that they also make them, but I think that is
So they make
outrageous.
them in France, but surely to get them across the channel.
I think it's still outrageous.
Yeah.
I think it's still outrageous. 35p more expensive here.
It's not necessarily shrinkflation. They're the same size, aren't they? Or are they smaller?
They are smaller here.
They're smaller.
Well. So they're smaller and more expensive.
Okay.
Turns out they're the 63rd most popular food and snack brand in Britain, apparently. But who knew? It's still outrageous. It's going to get Sun readers very, very upset tomorrow, I'm sure.
Definitely.
What
your sort of headline suggestion? Le baby bell. I mean, I can't. Le bell the baby. I mean, I can't.
Fromage fraud.
Fromage fraud. Oh, that's good. Fromage fraud.
Come up with. But
I like that.
Anyway. There we are.
Good stuff. Excellent. Well, Tom, thank you very much. As always, Tom Seward there, Assistant News Editor of The Sun and proud holder of a full driving licence. Thank you for letting us know your thoughts on all of that. Leslie says, oh dear, Ed Davey, really? By the way, when is he going to be held to account for his non-action in the post office scandal? Lots of people are getting in touch with that sort of, those kind of thoughts. And Grant says, I'm definitely watching several channels to see if I can guess the true story from the stories represented on all channels. And Jane says, perhaps the BBC could reinstate over 75 free licences. Some people can't afford it for genuine reasons. Hounding pensioners isn't a good look. Lots more to discuss on this. We'll take plenty more calls, voice notes, messages. Keep them coming in. 0344 499 1000.
The job of the BBC is to present facts.
Yes, but it's difficult, isn't it, when people don't want to face those facts?
No, it's not difficult.
The BBC's job is to say, yeah, there are facts over here which aren't so convenient for you. It's got a higher stress recognition of any media organisation.
People don't realise they're being lied to.
World.
Their climate coverage is so unscientific and unfact-based, it's a joke. Their pushing of transgender over women's rights, completely unscientific, unmedically proven and dangerous, I would say. Their coverage of Gaza has been, immoral.
Big news coming this December. Our talkTV app is moving to the Talk app. You can watch, catch up and listen to all your favourite shows and podcasts anytime, anywhere, all on the Talk app. From Monday, 1st of December, the talkTV app will no longer exist, so don't miss out. So head over to your App Store or Google Play and search Talk now.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
Just on the extremely important issue of baby bells, a hotel owner has been in touch to say we have many fridges in each guest bedroom and baby bells are the most common items left by guests. They must have more money than sense. Are they French though? That's the question I want to ask. Snack Rebleu is the headline that our headline people have come up with, which is pretty fantastic actually. Snack Rebleu. I couldn't have come up with that. That was very, very good. On the issue of the BBC, Ian has been in touch with a voice note. Let's hear what Ian has to say.
Listening to Ed Davies' rant, the fact is he goes on about saying the BBC is a trusted news source. Well, it's clearly not, is it? By their own admission, it's not a trusted news source. So we don't know what they've been telling us over the last 5-10 years is true or not. There's now a huge question mark over the integrity of their reporting. So for Ed Davies to come out with that line, I don't know. I just don't think Ed Davies got a brain.
Ian, thank you for that. Michael in Twickenham says, when I heard Deborah Turness state the BBC is not institutionally biased, I laughed so hard I pulled a muscle. Kay says, defund the BBC, go licence free, they're institutionally biased to the left. And Scott says, Ed Davies is a hypocrite of the highest order in Scott's opinion. The BBC is streamed to 16 million US homes. He'll call out Trump for standing up against the BBC while supporting the BBC, a foreign entity, public broadcaster, and misleading US citizens and potentially influencing the outcome of US elections with their negative press on Trump. I'm sure he'll call out China or Russia for disinformation, but not the BBC. Let's hear one more voice note. This is Peter on the BBC.
Peter, if the BBC is so confident it's wonderful and fantastic, which it isn't, why don't they produce a system where you can block all BBC content from anything and let me not get away and not pay the licence fee? I don't want to pay it, but I pay it because I'm forced to pay it, but I don't watch anything from the BBC. So how about a system where Virgin TV or whoever it may be, they block all BBC content. My TV can be set to block BBC content, then I don't have to pay the fee. How about that?
Peter, I think there has to be some sort of change coming on this. I think a licence fee that goes to one broadcaster, especially a broadcaster that smaller and smaller numbers of people are watching and even paying the licence fee towards. I think that has to change. Now, obviously, they have big hits like The Traitors, for example, watched by 12 million people. I'm a big fan. I watched it. I pay my licence fee really because I have to. I watch BBC News. I listen to the BBC News. I listen to lots of different broadcasters. And my job, you've got to hear all the different perspectives and make sure that you get a sense of what's going on from lots of different outlets. The problem, as Peter correctly identifies, is there are people who want to make a conscious choice and don't want that and don't want any BBC programmes. Well, there's got to be an option to watch, ITV, Channel 4, Channel 5 and other free-to-air stuff without having and live television without necessarily having a TV licence. It'll be really interesting to see what the Culture Secretary Lisa Nandy does with this, because the Royal Charter of the BBC is up for renewal in a couple of years' time. Tim is in Hartlepool and has given me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Tim, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Hi, Peter.
Hi there.
I don't understand how we even got to a place. What the background is where in a free market economy, we are nevertheless threatened with prison if we don't buy a particular supplier's product.
Yeah.
I don't know how we arrived here. Why did we ever put up with it?
I think that's a fair point, Tim. They do now, I think, not threaten people with prison. I think they've eased off on that. But there's got to be a way, as I was just saying, there's got to be a way to say, actually, I want to access maybe not all of it, maybe some of it. I was saying earlier, if there's a program I want to watch and they charge, like on Amazon Prime, for example, I'm an Amazon Prime subscriber, there are extra things. Say there's there's one particular episode of a comedy series, I'm Alan Partridge, I was watching the other day, and it costs sort of £1.89 or something to get that one program. I mean, that to me seems like a reasonable system to say you pay for one program rather than simply saying I'm going to pay the whole of the licence fee for a service that many people, many of our viewers and listeners, perhaps even you, Tim, don't access and don't want.
Well, certainly I would like the choice to be able to decide if I wanted to buy through subscriptions to have a product like the BBC. But when you look around, they do some really strange things, Peter. For example, these great big digital billboards that you see around towns and cities all over them.
Yep.
Last year, I was driving past one, and it was the BBC advertising what they were going to put on the tellies like a month down the road.
Right.
And so they're spending our license money, which we can't not pay, to tell us about something that we have to have, whether we want it or not. And you can imagine the cost of paying all of those massive billboards up and down the country.
Yeah, well, that is definitely quite weird. Tim, sorry, go ahead.
I'm just saying, where's the logic in a commercial business? The head of marketing would not advise the company to spend money advertising if the customers had to buy the product anyway.
Yeah, it's a very fair point. Tim, thank you for that. That's Tim in Hartlepool there. Ian in London is our next caller. Ian, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Hi, Peter.
Hi there.
What I'd like to say, first of all, is if this Tim Davey and the lady have resigned, does that mean they don't get their pension?
Oh, I'm sure they'll get their pension. I'm sure there's no issue with that.
So that means that quite simply, if Trump sues, who's going to be picking up the bill?
Well, not them. And the other thing that has been suggested, I don't know how true this is, but it's been suggested that actually both of them are on contracts and they're coming towards the end of their contracts. That's what's been suggested. I've seen that suggested by a number of people I trust. I don't know how true that is, but certainly I was actually speaking to a BBC broadcaster yesterday who said maybe Tim Davey has said actually, rather than waiting till the end of his contract, he'll do what some people call an integrity resignation. He'll resign and then say, well, it was just the right thing to do, and then go on and do another big job somewhere and be paid a huge amount of money somewhere else.
Doesn't that sound like Gary Lineker? What Gary Lineker did? He also was coming to the end of his contract and doing exactly the same thing. And one other thing, does that mean from now on the BBC will say the terrorist group Hamas, as opposed to the Hamas, the loving, kind, very sort of teddy bear people?
Well, I certainly hope that they start telling the truth about Hamas. I'm not sure they will, but they absolutely need to. Ian, great point, and thank you for your call. I really appreciate it. Tarquin's in London has given me a ring. Tarquin, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Cardi P, great show again. Great
Thank you.
show. Yeah, just I was thinking, given that it looks like Donald Trump is going to win £1 billion, not quid, maybe dollars or whatever, from the BBC in damages, it occurred to me, though, has it not to you, are we, the taxpayer, going to be funding that little payout, do you think?
Yeah, we will. We as licence fee payers, I mean, the money has to come from somewhere, and as someone was pointing out earlier on, about 65% of the BBC's income comes from the licence fee. So there were people actually questioning a bit earlier on the programme, Tarquin, maybe you didn't hear it, about saying, hold on a second, is Trump essentially suing us as the BBC gets its money from the public? Do you think this should go ahead? Some people have argued that he's bullying the BBC.
Well, I mean, it's entirely up to him. He can take almost like a private suit, can't he? It's entirely up to him. But I think that what galls me the most are these people within the organisation that either, if they haven't knowingly been there and given the nod to the splicing, incitement to violence, if they were actually there in the room when the splicing was going ahead, then they should waive their pension rights, I think. Why should they?
I want to know who did the splicing, who signed that off, who knew it had happened, who said it's okay to broadcast that, even though it changed the meaning. Did they not know? If they didn't know, they should have known. You know, there are loads of managers. The one thing
this is like Horizon, Peter. This is like the Horizon scandal. There's a lot more to this under the bonnet than we already know.
So much more. Tarquin, that is absolutely correct. I agree with you. And that is, there's so much more, as Tarquin says. There's a whole line of people. There's a whole series of editors, and they all have to be held responsible the whole way through, because there is a clear line. There's a clear level of responsibility. And, you know, I remember someone telling me about the Gaza documentary. I was talking to someone who used to work for the BBC, is now in the independent sector, who said, oh yeah, there were probably just too many executive producers. Well, all of them should have to take responsibility, and you can't say, oh well, someone else is responsible. There has to be a clear line of people who are in charge and who can be held accountable for all of that. Final call of the day, Mark in Glasgow. Mark, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Good evening, Peter.
Hi there.
Forgive me suggesting it, but you're a journalist. You know pretty well that a programme like the Panorama programme, with all the editors, all the sensitivities about Trump, would have been well reviewed. And those cuts, the way they put that thing together just before the presidential election, was no accident. Now, I've done a little bit of research. U.S. aid, which Trump stopped, there was basically a lot of money going to all sorts of places it had no right to. They gave, I think, something in the order of $3.2 million to the BBC And if you start
I remember reading about this, Mark, and there was a specific project. You're not wrong, but there was a specific project in regard to freedom of information, in regard to broadcasting. It wasn't particularly BBC News; it was a different part of the BBC. But you're not entirely wrong, Mark.
Yeah, the BBC is a massive conglomerate.
Yeah.
I think this was some supposed charitable part of the BBC.
That's right. I can't remember the exact details, but yeah, that certainly rings a bell.
I've got them in front of me, but I won't bore you with them. But essentially, the money went to the BBC. It went to support part of the BBC, although the BBC pretended it's hands off, etc. But in truth, the BBC, I've looked at some of the stuff they've done to Farage, where a sneering reporter said, "Oh, we're cutting away now from Farage and his far-right rubbish." Yeah. And that was a BBC television peak news.
I remember that. Well, she, in fairness, that newsreader was pulled up on that, Mark. But it does show a wider problem here. And when Deborah Turness says there isn't a cultural or editorial bias, it's hard to believe her, I think, Mark.
There totally is. I've stopped watching the BBC altogether, and frankly, the BBC licence fee, where we have to pay £170, £180 only to the BBC, I'm sick of it. You guys do a cracking job, and the blob makes damn sure you don't get a lot of mainstream advertising as they do GB and news. And this needs to be stopped because they're trying to shut you guys down. So
well, I hope they don't. I hope we'll be around for a long time to come. And Mark, thank you, and thanks for those kind words. I'm merely ending the call just because I have to speak to Kevin O'Sullivan, who's here on the other side of the news. Kevin, big day.
Extraordinary. The weirdest thing is that you know, intelligent men like Nick Robinson, John Simpson, you know, journalists for whom I have quite a lot of time. They don't look. I don't see eye to either with them politically, but good. It's like they're sort of blinded by the groupthink bubble that
James Landale has called it guff. Says this is all guff.
The groupthink bubble in which they all exist. So they actually think that this is. Or that the defenestration of Davey and Turness, and obviously, you know, they didn't come to this decision. They were told it's time, you have to go now. You cannot preside over any more disasters. These people, Robinson, Simpson, and the Guardian, this is a right-wing conspiracy. We should never, or the BBC should never have capitulated to this conspiracy. Well, this conspiracy, it's not a conspiracy. It is the latest in a long line of almost comical, massive balls-ups that Davey has presided over.
Well, it's based on fact. I mean, had they not done that edit on Trump, we probably wouldn't be having this conversation.
That's it.